Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Today's video is a product of the monthly patron vote, which you can check out in the description below, hint hint, and the winner is, well, not one I expected to see here, honestly. Like, this went head to head against Phantasm Spiral, and that's a meme deck, but when duty calls, I answer. So, without further ado, premiering in the August 2015 core set, Clash of Rebellions, Igknights were the first archetype revealed as part of the Dracoslayer storyline, and as part of the second year of Pendulum, represented the next step forward for the mechanic. And there wasn't a better way to show that off than with a bunch of normal monsters that blow themselves up. Which I say with the same dejected energy as when I saw that the new Majespecter cards did a number on my Dracoslayer lore theories, but honestly showed exactly what pendulums were capable of before the mechanic went over the top. And since we're going to be covering those mischievous Majespecter monsters next month thanks to new support, it's pretty fortuitous that we'll be covering the only other member of the Part 1 Dracoslayer lore archetypes we haven't already covered. So let's slide down the list to see who we've got, hammer home some of the finer details, then see if we can lock in any fiery friends. It's time to light the spark with Igknight Explained. So what's the deal with Igknights? Well, they're a series of fire warrior monsters, most of whom are also normal pendulums, with a focus on destroying your own cards for value. See, the deck's boss monsters don't really fit into our pendulum scales, instead opting to blow up your Igknight cards to get them out of your hand, which works pretty well with pendulums because any monsters that get smashed here can just be pendulum summoned back during a following turn, unless you have a pendulum summon on standby that you can use now. So it all boils down to having a lot of self-destruction based effects that we get for free as long as we have functioning scales. Though with the changeover to Master Rule 4, that's been a little tough to compensate for. Let's start with the normal monsters who make up about half the theme. Each one is either a scale 2 or 7, giving us access to levels 3, 4, 5, and 6 monsters to pendulum summon, and they don't even come with any restrictions. They also all share the same pendulum effect. If an Igknight card is in your other pendulum zone, you can destroy both cards in your pendulum zones, and if you do, add a fire warrior monster from your deck or grave to your hand. So the idea is that your opening hand has a fist full of Igknight cards, you scale them, destroy them, getting you another Igknight which represents one half of a complete scale. So you would keep doing this until you were down to your last pair. Then, since all those destroyed Igknights are now sitting pretty in the face-up extra deck, you could swing them all into action, and then you'd have all the Xyz and tribute fodder you could ever ask for. As for the monsters, we have 2 of each level that we can pendulum summon. Squire and Crusader are both level 3, Paladin and Templar are level 4, Margrave and Cavalier are 5, with Veteran and Gallant rounding things up as level 6. Their stats aren't too important, as even our higher leveled ones can be a tad underwhelming. They really do just act as mediums through which other cards strut their stuff. However, this does mean we get a ton of flavor text, and in combination with the art, we can deduce that, despite their very serious outward appearance, are a bunch of doofuses who trip over each other trying to do just about anything, suffering and causing friendly fire, blowing up their equipment, and all kinds of stuff along the way. Now, recently, we did actually get a Pendulum Effect Igknight monster, though it is also a Dracoslayer, and is only part of the theme due to the "this card is always treated as" clause, which some of you might be upset with, but it actually makes a ton of sense in lore. Ignis Phoenix, the Dracoslayer, is a level 4 monster with 1700 attack and 1900 defense with a scale of 7. As a pendulum spell, during your main phase, you can shuffle a face-up pendulum monster from your extra deck into the deck, then add a non-pendulum Dracoslayer or Igknight monster from your deck to your hand. As a monster, if this card on the field is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can special summon a Dracoslayer or Igknight monster from your deck, except a copy of this card, and if you do, it's treated as a tuner. The pendulum effect is a little rough, our non-pendulum pickings from both of those themes are a little lacking, but its monster effect is fantastic. It triggers when being blown up by your other Igknights, summons any Dracoslayer or Igknight monster from your deck, and allows you to access the Synchro pool, which is something you wouldn't be able to do without accessing outside help. So you could either summon a lowered level one to help with that, or get one of your Igknight boss monsters into rotation for free. The typing here seems a little off though. I mean, if it is an Ignis, why isn't it a Cybers type? Igknight Lancer is a level 7 monster with 2600 attack and 1800 defense, and while this card is in your hand, you can target 3 Igknight cards you control, destroy them, and if you do, special summon this card. Once per turn, you can target one other Igknight monster you control and return it to the hand, and if you do, place a spell or trap card your opponent controls on the bottom of their deck. And bouncing an Igknight to your hand isn't much of an issue, since you can just pendulum summon it right back. In fact, that might even be more beneficial to you now under Master Rule 4, as pendulum summoning from the hand has no restrictions. It even has a cousin, Igknight Champion, a level 8 monster with 2800 attack and 2300 defense, and has the same summoning effect as Lancer. And once per turn, you can target one other Igknight monster you control and return it to the hand, and if you do, place a monster your opponent controls on the bottom of their deck. Both of these are pretty savage removal. You don't trigger any graveyard effects, and your opponent will hardly ever get a chance to redraw that card lest their deck be shuffled. The problem is that, even with a recursive series of monsters, blowing up 3 is a bit of an investment. You'd almost rather just tribute summon them and save yourself the hassle. And while the removal is brutal, it is slow and situational. If your opponent isn't heavy on back row, then Lancer is a dud, and if the monster you want to get rid of has targeting protection, Champion's not the answer you want. Which leaves the deck in an odd place, because now it lacks a strong boss monster to rally behind, leaving them to be picked apart and integrated into all kinds of other decks. Just goes to show that if you're not the top pick, then much like these cards' effects, you're getting bottomed. Alright, that's all the Igknight monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps. Igknight Reload is a quick play spell card that has you revealing any number of pendulum monsters from your hand and shuffling them back into the deck, then drawing an equal number of cards as shuffled back into the deck, +1. But for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, you can't draw cards by card effects. So this is more of a generic pendulum support card, but does have a function for us that we'll be getting into with a later card. It does solve the issue of magical mallet type cards, namely, they usually draw you the amount of cards you put back into your deck, but since you spend a spell card to activate it, you're actually going -1. Reload fixes that by tacking on a +1. This makes it a proper mulligan, but that's kind of the problem. A, because it shuffles the cards into the deck, not places them on the bottom of your deck, you're at risk of drawing those cards again, unlike Runic Fountain, which is a way better draw engine. Second, as a mulligan, it's not necessarily guaranteed to get you out of a bad situation. At best, it puts bricks back into your deck, but only if those bricks are pendulum cards. And with the game going as fast as it does, we can't really afford the redundant draws. You could say it's a bit of a time crisis. Huh? Yeah, big shout out to all my arcade shooter fans out there for hanging on to that stretch of a reference. Igknight's Unite is a quick play spell card that targets an Igknight card you control, destroys it, and if you do, special summons an Igknight monster from your deck. This is another easy way to get out Lancer and Champion, which is nice if you're even playing them at all. The more likely scenario is that you're swapping one Igknight for one of a different level to make your extra deck plays line up better while filling up your face-up extra deck. But there is another option. When you activate Igknight Reload, you can chain Unite, targeting the reload. And now it's like you got an Igknight for nothing. It almost feels like you're getting away with something you shouldn't, like you're breaking the rules of the game. And your friends. Though, try not to actually do that. You wouldn't want anyone accusing you of having a bad aim, would you? Ignition Phoenix is a field spell card that grants all Igknight monsters on the field a 300 attack and defense boost. Once per turn, you can target an Igknight card you control, destroy it, and if you do, add an Igknight card from your deck to your hand. This is a phenomenal addition to the deck, searching all of your on-theme cards, including Reload and Unite. It fills up your extra deck if you pop monsters, and makes them a little more fearsome in battle. However, it did begin the trend of making it so the field spells did not have the Archetypes name in it. So if you're upset that your favorite field spell is a little tough to get a hold of, this is the one that started it all. However, I can forgive it this time because the name does sound like what happens when you boot up a game of Ace Attorney, and that feels just right to me. Igknight Burst is a continuous trap card, and once per turn, during your main phase, you can destroy up to 3 other Igknight cards you control, then return an equal number of cards your opponent controls to the hand. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add a face-up Igknight Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. Oh, this card is rough. It's a trap card, but only works during your main phase. And while it comes with a great rate on removal, it doesn't come with the flexibility you'd hope for in a card that takes a full turn cycle to actually get online. It's nice that we've got a recycling effect tacked on here, but for a card with a powerful name and some great art, Burst isn't exactly exploding onto the scene. Alright, so that's all the Igknight cards, but what do we do with them? Well, like I said, our boss monsters are pretty lame, which leaves us with a bunch of normal monsters that we could use for a lot of different decks. If we wanted to play pure, a strange idea but I'll go with it, we'll need cards that facilitate a normal monster beatdown that incorporates warrior and fire synergies. So what can we play to help them out? First up, we have to bring Luster Pendulum into the mix. It, plus any of our level 4 Igknights, makes Ignister Prominence the blasting Dracoslayer, still one of arguably the best synchro monsters ever printed. It gets another Dracoslayer out of your deck, and now you just so happen to have one that is also an Igknight, and is a non-targeting shuffle that pops one of your Pendulum cards. And if you pop Ignis Phoenix, that can summon your Lancer or Champion, and now you're off to the races. Though, if you don't want to run Luster Pendulum, Ignis Phoenix's effect does turn the card it summons into a tuner, so you can access Ignister Prominence without it, as well as the rest of the Synchro pool, since, as far as Synchros are concerned, Luster can only be used for Dracoslayer ones. Unexpected Die pulls our lower leveled Ignites out of our deck, and the more free monsters we can field before a Pendulum summon, the better. Because of this, Link Spider is going to be a valuable tool in mobilizing your monsters and slowly getting those Link arrows. Though if you instead first normal summon another Pendulum next to the Die's summoned one, that's all the material you need for Beyond the Pendulum. Just be careful with that on summon effect because, as it turns out, our Pendulum effects are the only ones we have, so there's a lot on the line. And a perfect way to exceed that play is by climbing up into Exceed the Pendulum after that. As for other pieces of normal support, Summoner's Art can act as more copies of your high-leveled Ignites, helping you to get them into rotation for powerful rank 5 and 6 plays. Painful Decision can likewise get you your lower-leveled Ignites while loading up some into your grave, which may seem counterintuitive in a Pendulum deck, but don't worry, that's what Exceed the Pendulum is for. How about Warrior Support? Like I mentioned previously, Isolde is an all-time great, getting you any Ignite while also letting you summon another from the deck if you send enough equip spells from there to the grave. And speaking of equip spells, we have a very special Fire Warrior we can search out with our Igknight Pendulum effects. Immortal Phoenix Gearfried. It's a big monster that's easy to summon, has great stats, and comes with its own negate. Not a bad boss. But really, the entire Fire Warrior pool is gonna love you. And by the whole pool, I mean almost exclusively Infernobles and Battling Boxers. Though there's also an argument for teching them in with Rescue Ace, since Lifter, Impulse, and Monitor are all searchable, and can even be Pendulum summoned to save you your normal. As for a silly tech pick, it's gotta be Heart of the Underdog. With a critical mass of normal monsters, you can fill your grip with a ton of Ignites, cycling through your deck while finding more Ignites or extenders like Fire Flint Lady, so you can build up a devastating phalanx. Alright, that's all my thoughts on Ignites, but how do they stack up against the Nova scale? Novelty. Pendulum, from the start, was touted as a mechanic that would help just about every other summoning method, and getting back Synchro, Fusion, and Tribute material was pretty nice, when you could get the scales to work. But Ignites represented the first, if rudimentary step, towards what a deck powered solely by Pendulum cards could do and what its game plan would look like. And from that point forward, destroying Pendulum cards to trigger their effect, only for you to have them swing into action later, became the mechanic's calling card. So this is an easy 5 in novelty from me. Objectivity. With Pendulum no longer allowing you to summon 5 monsters right out of the extra deck so easily every turn, this potential resource factory has slowed production to a reasonable pace. While the tools for Pendulum summoning to work under Master Rule 4 have never been better, Ignites still represent about the fairest of the traditional Pendulum themes in terms of playstyle, so we're awarding another 5 in objectivity. Versatility. Ignite's various levels make them great for Xyz summoning, have the opportunity to make some powerful links, and with the introduction of Ignis Phoenix, can even Synchro summon. And while their scales are no longer the best, they are still very substantial, and because of their ability to work with any Fire Warrior deck, they can be splashed in pretty effectively in those themes. It may not be every deck's cup of tea, you do have to commit quite a bit of deck space to splash them in effectively, but it's got more than enough to get it a 3 in versatility. Awesomeness. However, despite their utility, cycling through their scales is really all they do. They probably have the goofiest story out of the entire Dracoslayer storyline, but that's about the only thing I really care about them. Oh, and the rad-looking gun armor. So sadly, I've got to give Ignites a 2 on awesomeness, meaning this theme is getting a respectable 15 out of 20 on the Nova scale. And that's all I have to say about Ignites. They're a little more than an engine other decks use to accrue advantage, but for what they do, there's no better option. So next time you just need to summon a trained, powerful, clumsy, and klutzy crew, this should be your go-to group to enable your favorite deck and ignite your passions. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Ignites a light that burns twice as bright, or are they just burning out twice as quick? And which one's your favorite? I'm not gonna lie, Champion's launcher looks super sick, but I've got to give it up for Templar. Their posing is great. Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like the video, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Our coverage of Phantom Nightmare continues, and let me tell you, it's been a doozy of a set. From ancient themes coming back with a fresh coat of paint, to some more modern archetypes getting some new support to round out some of their rougher edges, there really is something for everyone in this set. Except for one little thing. Both Visas and Albaz only got a single card, so loreheads like me have to wait even longer to figure out what the heck is going on with them. Luckily, Konami hasn't completely dropped the ball with lore updates for this set, because on top of new Diabellstar happenings, the last theme from the Dracoslayer storyline that we haven't covered yet has received a substantial update. And while it has rendered my Dracoslayer lore video more or less obsolete, no, I'm still not over it, we did just cover Igknights last month, so there's no better time to talk about them than now. Premiering in the November 2015 core set Dimension of Chaos, Majespecters are the second theme to show up in the Dracoslayer cycle. And unlike Igknights, who kind of tripped over the starting line, seeing little to no competitive success at all, until over 8 years later, these cute little critters hit the ground, or should I say wind, running. They got splashed into every pendulum pile you could think of, boasting near impenetrable protection effects, more search redundancy than you could shake a stick at, and superb removal. But the theme was no slouch standing alone either. It's been going through some turbulent times lately now thanks to Master Rule 4, but some new cards from Phantom Nightmare have given it a breath of fresh air, and it's ready to take the competition by storm once again. So, before I run out of wind puns prior to the video starting, let's go over all these friend-shaped spirits, consult the barometer to find out what kind of storms are brewing, then see if we can find any allies who can help us seize the wind. Get ready to catch the updraft because it's time for Majespecters Explained. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the wonderful people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. So, what's the deal with Majespecters? Well, they're a series of wind spellcaster pendulum monsters that, strangely enough for the middle of Arc V, possess no pendulum effects at all. Kinda like the opposite of Igknights. But for as much potential is missed because of this, it also means there's no possibility of them adding any special summoning restrictions like we'd see in themes like Klee and Zephyra. So Majespecters are among the first pendulum-focused archetypes to let you go completely ham with deck building. As for its playstyle, it revolves around tributing your monsters to fuel super powerful back row. Removal, negation, summons from deck, you name it, these cards can do it. But what makes Majespecters so terrifying is the fact that almost none of the members of the theme can be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and that makes them supremely difficult to interact with. Basically, the only way you're stopping a Majespecter is either by punching over it, or hitting it with some kind of non-targeting, non-destruction removal. And even if you do get rid of them, as long as those scales are maintained, they're bringing them back again next turn. This level of protection is part of the reason a certain member of the theme has gotten into some hot water in the past, but we'll get to them later. For now, let's start by covering the first 3 monsters that form the backbone of this strategy. Majespecter Raccoon Bunbuku is a level 3 monster with 1200 attack, 900 defense, and a scale of 5. Majespecter Crow Yada is a level 4 monster with 1000 attack, 1500 defense, and a scale of 5. And Majespecter Fox Kyubi is a level 4 monster with 1500 attack, 1000 defense, and a scale of 2. They all have the same effect where, when normal or special summoned, you can add 1 Majespecter card from your deck to your hand, with Yada searching new spells, Kyubi searching new traps, and Bunbuku searching monsters, even including copies of itself. Like most decks, these are your core monsters, and I don't really need to explain why, but I'm gonna do so for the runtime. Searching is a bare minimum mechanic that any deck worth its salt should have today, and the more you can do it, the more consistent your strategy will be. But these 3 are better than most because their targeting immunity protects them from the likes of targeted hand traps like Imperm and Valor. Heck, even Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill targets, and that's starting to see some play recently. So unless your opponent drops an Ash Blossom or Forbidden Droplets specifically, these 3 are gonna get you what you need. And with them being pendulum monsters, they're supremely repeatable. Just get 1 of each into rotation and you're set for the rest of the game. But be careful, because these effects, and I cannot believe that Konami is still doing this at this point, have the universally hated "when you can" phrasing, and as such, can miss timing. Usually this isn't going to be a problem, but some of our newer cards do brush up against this interaction, so make sure that summoning one of these little guys is the last thing you do in a chain. Otherwise, your chances of getting that search will be gone with the wind. Alright, with those 3 done, let's move on to the rest of the squad which do their own unique things. Majespecter Cat Nekomata is a level 3 monster with 100 attack, 1800 defense, and a scale of 2. And when normal or special summoned, you can add a Majespecter card from your deck to your hand during the end phase. That's right, it wasn't enough for us to have 3 searchers, we've also got an on-theme Skarm. Unlike Skarm though, this searches you any on-theme card, not just monsters. But like Skarm, you will forget to resolve it half the time, so be careful about that. While it's a little bit slower than I'd like, especially in the face of cards like Bunbuku, it's still a pretty good idea to keep it around, because while we're not exactly lacking when it comes to scale 2 monsters, it never hurts to have a spare, just in case. And if nothing else, Nekomata can grab you a starter for next turn as insurance in case your board gets broken. And isn't that just the cat's pajamas? Majespecter Porcupine Yama Arashi is a level 4 monster with 1500 attack and defense and a scale of 2. During the main phase, if you control a Majespecter monster as a quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a Majespecter spell in your graveyard and set it to your field. This is one of our newer cards, and you can actually tell because it says if, not when. But goofy rulings aside, this is now your primary search target for Bunbuku, as it makes for a phenomenal extender. Summon it next to the Bunbuku you searched this with, and that's any link 2 you could ask for. As for what we'll be going into, we'll get into that in a bit, but trust me, it's worth the wait. The spell resetting effect is very handy too, because we've got some real bangers. And while admittedly most are quick plays, which makes their deployment slower than implied, it's still great for the grind game. So don't be surprised if your opponent prickles a bit when they see this card. Majespecter Toad Ogama is a level 4 monster with 1300 attack, 500 defense, and a scale of 5. When it's normal or special summoned, you can set a Majespecter spell or trap card from your deck, but you can't activate that card for the rest of the turn. This is kind of like if Yada and Kyuubi got rolled into one, but don't think that this card can fill both roles. Ogama has uses all its own. For one, it gives you a much more flexible choice than the dedicated searchers, letting you grab whatever you need to complete your board setup. The activation delay also isn't even that big of a deal, since most of our back row is made of trap cards and quick play spells which can't be activated the turn they're set anyway. And because it sets straight from the deck instead of searching it outright, it's absurdly resistant to hand traps, bypassing the deck lock out of Droll and being outright immune to Ash Blossom. So make sure to activate this effect last on a giant pendulum summon, thus chain blocking the rest of your Majespecter effects, and no hand trap will stop you from getting everything you need to make your opponent croak. Majesty Pegasus, the Dracoslayer, is a level 4 monster with 1500 attack and defense and a scale of 2, and they're always treated as a Majespecter card. As a pendulum scale, if you have a Dracoslayer or Majespecter card in your other pendulum zone, you can add one Dracoslayer pendulum monster with a different name from that card from your deck to your hand, then you can destroy one card in your pendulum zone. As a monster, as a quick effect, you can discard it, and for the rest of the turn, your opponent can't target or destroy your Dracoslayer monsters with card effects. And if it's pendulum summoned or special summoned by the effect of a Dracoslayer card, you can add a field spell card from your deck to your hand, then discard a card. Note that it says any field spell, a notoriously dangerous line of text. While we do have some on-theme field spells we can get with this effect, there are also some pretty filthy ones we can grab with it too, but we'll go over them a tad later. I'll admit this is far more of a Dracoslayer card than a Majespecter one, but thankfully, Dracoslayers play very well with our theme, and we'll be sure to go over how once we reach the tech pick section. On top of that, this card's pendulum effect enables that entire engine, even making space in your scales for the monster that you searched if you need it. Majesty Pegasus even lets those Dracoslayers get in on the Majespecter protection with that quick effect. After all, who doesn't love an untargetable and indestructible Ignister Prominence, even if it is only for one turn? Once you do that, your opponent will definitely know that you aren't horsing around. Majespecter Unicorn Kirin is a level 6 monster with 2000 attack and defense and a scale of 2. And during either player's turn, you can target a pendulum monster in your monster zone and one monster your opponent controls and return both targets to the hand. Oh lord, Kirin may not seem like anything special nowadays, but back in the early Pendulum era, this card was absolutely disgusting. It's a quick effect bounce for anything threatening that can be splashed into just about any Pendulum deck. And with it being a Majespecter, it also came with the targeting and effect destruction protection, making it much harder to interact with than it had any business being. And the loss of a Pendulum monster doesn't actually mean anything to you, since you can just Pendulum summon that monster right back on your next turn. In fact, it saw so much success that, at time of recording, Kirin is currently banned in every format. TCG, OCG, even Master Duel, but with plenty of other monsters available in the game today that do way more for way less, and the pendulum mechanic being a shadow of its former self courtesy of Master Rule 4, there are plenty of arguments for letting Kieran out of the stables. As for how it performs in the deck it belongs to, it was just as potent of an option in Majespecters as any other deck, if not a bit tricky to pendulum summon without outside help. After all, Majespecter scales only go up to 5. It would be nice for Majespecters to have their main deck boss back, but given Konami's apparent hostility towards Pendulum for the last few years, I wouldn't put it past them to keep Kieran banned in spite of the community's voice. After all, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it execute good ban list policy. That's all for the main deck monsters, but we also have a couple of offerings from the extra deck as well, and this is where things are gonna get silly. Majespecter Draco is a rank 4 Xyz Pendulum monster with 2300 attack, 2000 defense, and a scale of 5, requiring 2 level 4 monsters as material. While it's a pendulum scale, if you have a Majespecter or Dracoslayer card in your other pendulum zone, you can add a Majespecter card from your deck to your hand, then you can destroy a card in your pendulum zone. As a monster, it has the standard Xyz monster pendulum summoning clause, and if a monster is tributed, you can detach a material from this card to special summon a level 6 or lower wind spellcaster monster from your deck, and this effect can be used up to twice per turn. And if this card is destroyed by battle, card effect, or is tributed, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. Wow, this is fantastic. As we mentioned previously, a majority of our theme's power comes from our back row, most of which will have you tributing a monster as cost. So naturally, the amount we can disrupt our opponent was limited by the amount of fodder we can scrape together by the end of our turn. Until now. Because once you tribute a monster, Draco gives you an immediate refund for it, and you may even get a search for your troubles. It even lets you summon Kieran straight from your deck without using any of your Bunbuku searches. You know, if Kieran was still legal. But because it lists wind spellcasters, not just Majespecters, we've got some great options beyond our theme we can pull from. The most heinous of these being the dreaded Droll and Lockbird, because if you can bounce that card back to your hand somehow, your opponent's guaranteed to have a bad time on their turn. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up being the final nail in the coffin for Droll. And finally, once it's out of material, you can simply feed it to a back row, and it'll load itself into the scale to give you even more search power. That being said, this is the first Majespecter monster we've covered to actually lack the protection effect of the rest of the theme, and that makes it a walking bullseye for interaction that your main deck monsters are safe from, which is a bit of a bummer. Nevertheless, Draco is a very welcome addition to the team, even if it is just Majesty Pegasus riding Kieran. Hardly a dragon, but hey, it's nice to see that Kieran's still with us in spirit. Majespecter Orthrus Nue is a Link 2 monster with 1500 attack and requires 2 pendulum monsters, including a Majespecter monster, as material. When it's Link summoned, you can add 2 face-up Majespecter monsters from your extra deck to your hand, then you can add 2 Majespecter pendulum monsters with different names from each other from your deck to your extra deck face-up. But you cannot special summon monsters from your extra deck for the rest of the turn, except Majespecter monsters and Dracoslayer monsters. Even before Master Rule 4 came along and nerfed the pendulum mechanic to hell and back, Majespecters had a critical weakness: being able to assemble a complete scale in a timely manner. And even if you did manage that, chances are that you wouldn't have enough monsters left to follow up with. But Nue just hands you back the material you use to make it once it hits the board, and more often than not, that's going to be Bunbuku and Yamarashi, which gives you those complete scales. It even loads up 2 more specters straight from your deck for your troubles, and because it doesn't add from deck to hand, we have another effect that bypasses Droll. How cool is that? But just like Draco, Nue also lacks the Majespecter protection effect, and with how much of an enabler it is, it's a massive lightning rod for the targeted hand traps I mentioned earlier. Because, well, what else is your opponent going to use them on? The Majespecter and Dracoslayer restrictions are also a little more frustrating than I'd like to admit. It turns out that generic pendulum support from the extra deck is getting better and better as the years go on, and not having easy access to that kind of bites. Although, given that Nue is basically Electromite on steroids, I can completely understand why those restrictions are in place. So, despite the flaws, this card is excellent, and I'm sure it's going to help Majespecters reach some Nue heights. Alright, that's all of our monsters, and since we've been alluding to their power for the whole video so far, let's finally go over those spells and traps. Majespecter Storm is a normal spell card that has you tributing a wind spellcaster to target a monster your opponent controls and shuffle it into the deck. Ooh, talk about starting off with a bang! I've said it on multiple occasions and it bears repeating. One of the most effective ways of permanently getting rid of a card is by shuffling it into its owner's deck, especially since it avoids any leave the field effects that monster might have. And because Storm doesn't have a hard once per turn clause, it's even repeatable, either through searching another copy with Yada, or resetting it from grave with Yama-Arashi. And what makes it better is that this is the only spell it can reset that you can use immediately. As far as on-theme board breakers go, this is the best tool for the job that we currently have available, because it's really good at storming your opponent's defenses. Majespecter Cyclone is a quick play spell card that has you attributing a wind spellcaster to target one monster your opponent controls and destroy it. While destruction isn't as desirable a method of removal as spinning, Cyclone isn't a card you should overlook, because with it being a quick play spell, it trades removal efficiency for speed. There may often come a time where you need to deal with a monster right frickin' now, and in such case, you can flip this on your opponent's turn, or chain it from your hand during your own turn, and kick that monster right out of the way. And on the rare occasions where your opponent's able to actually target your monsters, like Draco and Niue, you can use Cyclone to escape that effect by tributing them, so long as your opponent has a monster to pop. It's not quite as quick to use as Storm, despite the fact that it's a quick play spell, but set this card with Ogama or Yama-Arashi, and just seeing it sitting menacingly on your side of the field will really cyclone out your opponent. Majespecter Sonics is a quick play spell card that targets a Majespecter monster you control, and until the end of the turn, its attack and defense become double its current attack and defense, but all damage it inflicts to your opponent this turn is halved. One thing you may have noticed is that while Majespecters are very good at keeping themselves safe from targeting and effect destruction, they come with weedle-bitty battle stats as a trade-off. Heck, our strongest monster, Draco, isn't even getting past a Red Eyes on its own. So if you need to brute force your way over a big chungus, then Sonics is what you're going to want to use. Also, keep in mind that the downside of your monster only dealing half damage does not stack if you use multiple copies of Sonics. It does half damage no matter how many copies of it you play. The attack and defense bonuses, though, do stack. So if you're the kind of mad scientist who actually runs this card in multiples, then your opponent's going to get whacked for a huge chunk of damage out of nowhere. But I do really wish that it was Yama-Arashi on this card and not Ogama. I know that Sonics precedes Yama-Arashi by almost a decade, but you can't just put Sonic on a card and then not have a spiny critter on it. Where's the alt art? Majespecter Wind is a quick play spell card that special summons a Majespecter monster from your hand or graveyard, but you can optionally tribute a Wind spellcaster on activation to summon that monster from your deck instead. And unlike the other Majespecter spells, Wind is a hard once per turn. And that's for good reason, because this card is a bop. See, most of our Majespecters are a good investment for our normal summon to begin with, but you ideally want to start with Bunbuku. But if you have access to Wind, then any Majespecter becomes Bunbuku. Heck, since Yada can search this, it's a guaranteed combo starter. Ain't that neat? And even if you can't pay the cost, that hand or grave summon isn't worth scoffing at either. Because we run Xyz monsters, then sooner or later, some of our Majespecters are going to end up in the grave where you normally can't get them. Alternatively, your Pendulum summon could be hit by a Solemn Strike or what have you, then they'll also be sent to the grave, most likely to never be seen again. But if you use Wind to summon from the graveyard, you can keep resetting it to the field with Yama-Arashi's on summon effect, and you can slowly but surely climb your way back into the game. And remember that trick I mentioned with Cyclone to let Niue dodge your opponent's targeted interaction? Well, Wind is even better for that, because it doesn't even require your opponent to have a monster. This card's power definitely cannot be understated and is a massive game changer for the archetype. The only real complaint I have with it is the name. Granted that at time of recording this card hasn't come out in the TCG yet, so the official translation could end up being anything. But when it comes to the fan translation, there's no shortage of wind-themed names you could have chosen. Majespecter Squall, Majespecter Gale. But no, we went with Majespecter Wind. Clearly whoever chooses the card names was out of work that day, because that name blows. Majesty's Pegasus is a field spell card that gives all of your Majespecter monsters a 300 attack and defense boost, and you contribute a Wind spellcaster monster to special summon a level 4 or lower Majespecter monster from your deck. And here it is for the last time, the classic Dracoslayer storyline archetypal field spell that isn't name stamped, making it frustratingly unsearchable on theme. And the kicker is that most of these field spells aren't even that good to make up for it, with the most notable exception of this rule being Dragonic Diagram, which is still limited at time of recording. But Majesty's Pegasus is a close second, and thankfully, Majesty Pegasus does help us float this into our hand, so it's a little more searchable now. It has been upstaged a little bit since Majespecter Wind exists now, but by being a field spell, it lets you exchange a monster for a Majespecter every turn rather than just once, which is amazing. And that boost to all your Majespecters isn't nothing either. With how small they are, they'll need all the buffs they can get, and represents an extra 1800 points of damage when attacking with a full board of Majespecters into an open field, so it can make more of a difference than it lets on. But after seeing one mediocre Dracoslayer field spell after another on this channel, it's nice to see the last ones actually playable, and there's a certain majesty to that. Majespecter Gust is a normal trap card that targets a Majespecter monster in your Pendulum Zone and special summons it. This one is kinda bad, I can't lie. Majespecters already do so much searching that dismantling your scale for one more search is redundant at best, and a terrible idea at worst. If Gust was a spell card, I might be inclined to think differently since you'd probably be able to use this as an extender for link plays, but sadly, the effect is stuck on a trap card, making it slow as molasses. As such, this card is less Gust and more guff. Although I do enjoy that the art depicts exactly what it felt like to deal with Kieran back in the day. Majespecter Tornado is a normal trap card that has you attributing a wind spellcaster to target one monster your opponent controls and banish it. Now that's more like it. While Storm has the more effective removal, and Cyclone has the benefit of being usable at a moment's notice during emergencies, Tornado strikes a middle ground between those two cards. It's slower to come online than Cyclone, but provides more effective removal in exchange. And while Banishing doesn't get around monster effects that activate when those monsters leave the field like Storm does, it's significantly harder to get that monster back from the banished zone than the grave. And Tornado being a trap card obviously means we can also use it to jam up our opponent's play sequences, unlike Storm, which as a normal spell is exclusively for breaking boards. But seeing this art has given me a bit of a brainwave. I've always questioned why Storm Chasers actively seek out tornadoes. Well, if every tornado has a cute pettable wind raccoon at its center, I totally get it, sign me up! Majespecter Tempest is a counter trap card that has you attributing a wind spellcaster monster when a monster would be special summoned or a monster effect is activated. You negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Yeah, we already have more removal than we know what to do with, so let's throw a searchable Solemn Strike into the mix as well, because why not? What's more, Tempest doesn't even cost you any life points. And since we'll be attributing a monster as cost, we can even use it to trigger Draco. Absolutely wild. As far as counter traps go, this is going to make your opponent's life miserable, so we naturally want to hit them with it as much as possible. After all, hell is empty, and all the evil critters are here. God, are we really quoting Shakespeare now? I have got to get some new puns. Majespecter Supercell is a continuous trap card that prevents the activation and effects of other Majespecter cards activated on your field from being negated while you have a Majespecter card in your Pendulum Zone. And once per turn, you can target 5 Majespecter cards in your grave and on resolution, shuffle all 5 into the deck, then draw a card. Yup, we have an on-theme Pot of Avarice that we can use every single turn. And if you didn't notice, it also lets you recycle your spells and traps, making the Majespecter grind game very real. Plus, it even prevents our opponent from interfering with our setups, including Nue. But there is a bit of a problem here. Because Majespecters are primarily a back row focused deck, slots in the back row are a precious resource. Back in Master Rule 3, this wasn't a problem at all, with the Pendulum Zones being separate from your back row. Nowadays, we're only going to have 3 to work with in most cases. And with Supercell being a continuous trap card, it's going to be sticking around on the field, essentially taking up a whole third of the space we would use to place disruption tools in. And on top of that, it is a trap card, so that negation protection isn't going to do much to help your Nue if it gets impermed on turn 1. So since the game probably isn't going to last long enough to justify having to play the grind game anyway, it's not inexcusable to pass this card over. Supercell is a nice option, but it's certainly no perfect sell. Okay, now that we've covered all the Majespecter cards, here's a combo that will show you just how much advantage this deck can grind out from only a couple of cards. All we're gonna need for this combo is a single Bunbuku and a card to discard. Start by normal summoning your Bunbuku, using its effect to search out Yama Arashi. Since you control a Majespecter, you can immediately summon that Yama-Arashi from your hand with its effect. Link Bunbuku and Yama-Arashi into Nue, and use Nue's on-summon effect to add back those two monsters, adding Yatta and Majesty Pegasus from your deck to your face-up extra deck. From there, we'll scale Bunbuku and Yama-Arashi, and pendulum summon Majesty Pegasus and Yatta, using those two effects to add Majespecter Wind and Majesty's Pegasus from your deck to your hand, discarding that random card we had in hand for Majesty Pegasus' effect. Now we'll overlay Pegasus and Yatta to summon Draco, then activate Wind, tributing Nue to special summon Ogama from your deck. On a new chain, Ogama will set a Majespecter trap card from your deck as Chain Link 2, and at Chain Link 1, Draco will detach a material to summon Kyuubi from your deck, which will then search you a second Majespecter trap card. Make sure you resolve those two effects in that order, because if you resolve Draco as Chain Link 2, Kyuubi will miss timing. Now we'll activate Majesty's Pegasus, tributing either of our level 4 Majespecters to summon Nekomata from the deck. On another new chain, Nekomata will activate its effect to get you another Majespecter search at the end phase, and Draco will detach its second material to summon a second Yama-Arashi from your deck. Its effect will now trigger because we didn't use it on its initial summon, resetting the Majespecter Winds in your graveyard. Finally, we'll overlay Yama-Arashi and our other level 4 to summon Magister Paladin the Dracoslayer, which will get us another end phase search of any pendulum monster you want. So from 2 cards, you've set up 2 disruptive effects with your 2 trap cards, and have gotten every single Majespecter which is currently legal into rotation. And you even have Nekomata and Magister Paladin searching you 2 cards during the end phase, meaning this whole turn cost you nothing in card advantage. Alright, so that's all the Majespecter cards, but what do we do with them? If all the tools that we have laying around to derail our opponent's combos aren't an indicator of this, control is in our blood. So our first priority is to get all of our names into rotation, while grabbing as much of our back row as possible to disrupt as many critical plays as we can. And once our opponent's worn out, we'll perform a big pendulum summon to blow them away on the crackback. But what can we play to help them out? Well, because the summon restriction of Nue excludes us from summoning anything except Majespecters and our Draco-slaying friends, on top of the fact that Majesty Pegasus is one of them, we have no excuse to not be running some other Draco-slayers. Ignis Phoenix is a great card to scale alongside Majesty Pegasus, unlocking Pegasus' search effect and summoning another Draco-slayer from your deck once you pop Ignis for that effect. It's even scale 7, so if we ever get Kirin back, you'll be able to pendulum summon it too. And if you search Dynamite Power Load off of Majesty Pegasus' effect, you can use their pendulum effect to summon Majesty Pegasus from your scale, and congrats, you've not only enabled the field spell searching effect, but if you started with Ignis, you've also gathered 2 pendulums on board to make Nue with. As for the extra deck Dracoslayers, Dinoster Power works great alongside Draco, since summoning it requires that you tribute monsters. This will then fire off the deck summoning effect of Draco, because it works when any monster gets tributed for any reason. You could even feed a Draco that's out of material to Dinoster Power, which will let you throw Draco into your scales for an extra search. And Ignister Prominence is still one of the most bonkers forms of removal you could ask for. So since Ignis Phoenix kindly makes whatever you summon with it into a tuner, why not take advantage of it? Because we're a control deck, Floodgates are usually going to be our first port of call. But as a pendulum deck that makes heavy use of the back row, continuous trap cards don't exactly jive with us. But we did just finish talking about Majesty Pegasus, and since that card adds any field spell from our deck to our hand, what devious options do we have access to? Well, Necro Valley is certainly a classic. While Majespecter monsters will occasionally find their way into our grave after being detached as Xyz material, for the most part we don't actually have to worry about being able to summon from the grave, so it actually ends up being much more of a one-sided floodgate in this case than it may appear. And of course, we are a spellcaster deck, so Secret Village of the Spellcasters can be absolutely backbreaking for your opponent. Slap this thing down after you summon some Majespecters, and that's access to a third of the card pool completely denied to your opponent. Unless they're also on a spellcaster deck themselves, in which case, Majesty's Pegasus is probably still your best bet. Draco's effect to summon any wind spellcaster from your deck is basically an open invitation to make some sort of hybrid deck, and what other wind spellcaster themes can we tap into? Wind Witches! Summon a Glass Bell with Draco's effect, and that'll get you access to Snowbell, giving you 2 tuners to work with. And chances are that you'll have a spare level 4 Majespecter on board, so it's super easy to climb up into an indestructible Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon from there. Or if you're starting from an empty board, we can secure ourselves against Nibiru with the Ice Bell line. This does wind lock you, but you are running a wind deck, so you should be fine. And by going through Winterbell, we can even inflict a little burn damage while we're at it, because who doesn't like cheesing their opponent in time? It goes without saying that we should be running beyond the Pendulum. After all, adding any Pendulum monster you like from your deck to your hand for the low price of a little ooh, ow, bone damage is, as it turns out, pretty good. But because so many of our effects trigger on summon, Exceed the Pendulum is also going to shine in Majespecters. It'll get Bunbuku back out of your extra deck so that you're ready for your next turn once you link summon it at the bare minimum, but with Majespecter Wind being the only on-theme way to get back your Majespecters, which are stuck in the grave, pulling them back out as a quick effect and triggering their search effects when you do so is to die for. But make sure you wait until resolution before you do this to prevent any timing from being missed. And Exceed the Pendulum also pulls double duty by being a great bridge into Access Code Talker when it's time to throw your opponent directly into the sun. Now, you know how much of a lorehead I am, and whenever there's an opportunity for a lore crossover, I simply have to take it. So, despite my burning hatred for the archetype, meet Gen X Blast Fan. Looks may be deceiving, but this actually is an honest-to-goodness wind spellcaster, so it fits right in with us. Special summon it off of Draco or Pendulum summon it, and it'll search you Gen X ally Birdman, which may just be Revolution Synchron at home, but the synchro options it can let us access are stellar. It's even the card that enables our pseudo-search of Drolan Lockbird I mentioned earlier. Just bounce it back to your hand once you special summon it with Draco, and you've got yourself a Lingering Floodgate ready to go. As for the synchro options, Ancient Fairy Dragon is probably our best fit, since we can play another Spectre from our hand if need be, and cycle out those devious field spells. Or if you need a little more aggression, you could use Odd Eye's Meteor Burst Dragon, which can keep your opponent off of monster effects during the battle phase, and pluck a Majespecter out of your scales for an extra search if need be. I know I gave Majespecter Gust some grief over this a little while ago, but Meteor Burst actually does it in a timely manner, so he gets a pass. As for a silly tech pick, Majespecters aren't exactly known for being big bruisers. Sure, we can build up a field of massive Link monsters, but come on, that's boring. However, if you're on the Blast Fan package that I was just talking about, then Nirvana High Paladin is right at your fingertips. If you happen to Pendulum summon a Bunbuku or Nekomata, then you can use that as the tuner substitute alongside the level 7 you made with Birdman to go into this. And Nirvana can scoop up any card from your grave when it's summoned, from hand traps to Majespecter traps, and it even slices your opponent's life points in half when it beats a monster, making it even easier for you to close the game out on the spot. And that's not even mentioning the shenanigans you can get up to if you manage to get Nirvana into your scales. 2021 may not be worth living in, but I'm having a blast playing Nirvana High Paladin. Alright, that's all I know about Majespecters, but how do they measure up against the Nova scale? Novelty. The development of Pendulum was at a point where it was eager to show off how it interacted with other mechanics. Igknight showed that destroying your own revivable monsters wasn't a big deal, and now Majespecters would do the same for tributing, on top of showing just how busted on summon effects could get on monsters you could resummon over and over again. Not to mention that they weren't afraid to lean into the still rare Wind Spellcaster combination, so I have no problem awarding Majespecters a 5 in Novelty. Objectivity. The protections that each Majespecter had back in the day made them pretty difficult to work around. Even if you had the advantage of power and numbers, you still had to chew through a whole field of these fur nuggets every turn, giving that player plenty of time to stabilize. Nowadays, with better forms of removal and more restrictions on Pendulum summoning, the deck has been brought to heel, so it's less blow your house down and more being a blow hard. That being said, the new support is no joke, and the removal options granted to us are very strong. I could be overestimating them, but I feel like these cards are going to be a hurricane force to be reckoned with, so they're getting a 4 in objectivity. Versatility. When Pendulums were young, Majespecters were an easy splash due to their absurd levels of searching effects and powerful removal tools. A searchable Solemn Strike is, after all, no joke. Nowadays, these options are a bit more bricky than dedicated Pendulum piles, and so these critters don't tend to see play in other themes. We will, of course, be more than happy to incorporate any Pendulum support that's been released, but with them needing a large amount of engine cards to function properly, we're looking at a 3 in Versatility. Awesomeness. Your mileage may vary depending on how you feel about control decks on this one. Now that Majespecters are incentivized to play as few floodgates as possible, it's much more interaction based, which you may find more fair and enjoyable. Me? I think the concept is cool, but it's now kind of lost in the slurry of pendulum good stuff we have access to. Being a Dracoslayer adjacent deck helps for me, especially since the new support ties them in much more closely, but with the looming danger of the deck turning into Droll & Lock Turbo, I'm giving the theme a tentative 3 in awesomeness, meaning Majespecters get a 15 on the Nova scale from me. And that's all I have to say about Majespecters. The theme has fallen on some hard times, lacking its best payoff and 2 whole zones, dealing a big blow to their control playstyle. But I'm confident that with this new support and a little Dracoslayer magic, these mythic monsters will claw their way back to playability and show the meta they aren't out of the game yet, thanks to this second wind. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Majespecters a breeze to play, or are they still a natural disaster of an archetype? And which one's your favorite? For me, it's not a particular monster, but Majespecter Gust. Take a look at that art, it's just the best. Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like the video, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. While pendulums were introduced in the Duelist Alliance, I think they really hit their stride in Clash of Rebellions. Sure, the first year of Pendulum's core sets had Clifforts, but they felt less like a pendulum deck and more like a Monarch-esque deck that had a mechanic to help them get some free, effective tribute fodder. Sure, it did technically involve pendulum summoning, but it just ended up feeling like triggering a bunch of tree-born frogs. It lacked the flair, the pizzazz, that certain je ne sais quoi that made the mechanics such a sight to behold. Suffice it to say, Clifforts are not a Yugioh approved deck. But Clash of Rebellion and the year of core sets to follow marked the next step of the mechanics design. Igknights focused on destroying themselves to set up searches, only to use pendulum summoning to get back all the cards they lost to build big boards. Majespecters focused on the on-summon part of the mechanic, gaining advantage every time they were brought back, making them very tenacious foes. And Amorphages, well, you already know how I feel about them. But my favorite theme to come out of this cycle is definitely Dinomist. They're certainly one of the more aggressive strategies of the bunch, but they have a number of defensive and stun tricks at their disposal without losing any of their offensive focus. In fact, I would say they're the strategy most like the next Ancient Guardian set we'll be covering, Do-Re-Mi chords, and I think it'll be helpful to have some context on how a theme like this can work before covering them in earnest. So let's do some automaton archaeology to catalog these Cretaceous creations, study them in their natural habitat to discern their playstyle, and spare no expense with additions that can help us out. It's time to blow off some steam with Dinomist. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 5,000 subs and you can help make it happen. Once we reach that lofty goal, I'll be making Heroes Explained, covering everything from Contrast Hero Chaos to Extra Hero Wonder Driver, and every related monster, spell, and trap in between. We've also got our Discord, where you know I had to explain it to him, and a Twitter where you can stay up to date on channel news and my bad takes. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So what's the deal with Dinomists? Well, they're a series of water attribute machine pendulum monsters whose scales are 3 or 6, which is very convenient since all of them are either levels 4 or 5. They also all share a pendulum effect depending on their scale. For the scale 3s, if any number of your other Dinomist cards you control would be destroyed by battle or your opponent's card effect, you can destroy the scale 3 instead. The scale 6s, once while they're face up in the pendulum zone, can negate an activated effect that targets any number of your Dinomist cards you control, and then the scale is destroyed. This means that a complete scale gives your team some temporary defenses against targeting and destruction, which is a nice touch when you're on the beatdown. It should also be noted that none of these effects actually activate. The scale 3s are a destruction replacement effect, and the scale 6s negate on resolution. So your opponent can't count on using activation negation to stop it, they're just gonna have to remove it before they become a problem. Let's start with our level 4s. Dinomist Ankylos is a scale 6 with 1500 attack and 2000 defense, and any monster that's destroyed by battle with your Dinomists is banished. Not Ankylos, any Dinomist. This adds a pretty threatening layer to any of your pendulum summons, especially against opposing pendulum strategies and graveyard reliant decks. For example, every deck that I like. And while pendulum summoning isn't what it used to be, pairing them up with just one chonky attacker is all that it can take to banish your opponent's game plan to the Jurassic period. Dinomist Plesioos is a scale 6 with 1700 attack and 1400 defense, and while they're on the field, all face-up monsters your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense for every Dinomist card you control. That means monsters, the continuous spells and traps that we'll get into, and your pendulum scales. This is one of those incremental effects that gets really scary really fast, because nothing's stopping you from having more than one Plesioos on the field. And while sometimes the debuff is only 300 or 400 points, every bit can be the difference between your board getting broken and your opponent's getting watered down. Dinomist Terran is a scale 3 with 1800 attack and 1200 defense, and when they destroy an opponent's monster by battle, you can add a Dinomist card from your deck to your hand. This works really well with Plesioos, helping to take down bigger threats and giving you even more advantage for it, and considering the kinds of cards Terran gives you access to, it's well worth it. Normally, I'm not a fan of effects like these, having to wait until the battle phase, and then having to get over a monster before you get any value, but for Terran, I'll let it fly. Our last level 4 is Dinomist Stegosaur. They're scale 3 with 1600 attack and 1800 defense, and if any other pendulum monster you control battles an opponent's monster, after damage calculation, you can destroy both monsters. Now, this effect is really cool. Ankylos is great for when you have a commanding presence on the board attack-wise, but Stegosaur lets you use your monster attacks as removal when you're not in control. It doesn't even specify Dinomists, so any pendulum you can splash in can take advantage of it. Next, we have our level 5s, and I'm going to lump our first two together because they're functionally the same card. Dinomist Brachion is a scale 6 with 2000 attack and 800 defense, and you can special summon them from your hand if you don't already control a Brachion, and your opponent has a monster on the field with the highest attack, even if it's tied with one of your monsters. Dinomist Ceratops is a scale 3 with 2100 attack and 400 defense, and if you don't already control a Ceratops and all the monsters you control are Dinomists, minimum 1, you can special summon them from your hand. So functionally, both of them are free special summons from the hand under certain conditions, but the question here is, why do pendulum monsters have their effects wasted on just being ways to special summon them and not something more useful like our level 4s? I mean, we already have pendulum summoning, right? Well, I would argue that it helps to keep you playing, even if you don't have complete scales. Some of the worst things about pendulum archetypes with high-level monsters is that if your opponent keeps you off your scales, you just can't play. But Brachion and Ceratops help to alleviate that by not being entirely dependent on those scales, helping to make your deck run like a well-oiled machine. Continuing on with our level 5s, we have Dinomist Rex. They're a scale 6 with 2400 attack and 2200 defense, and after they've attacked at the end of the damage step, you contribute another Dinomist monster to activate one of two effects. You can either have Rex attack another monster, but this time with piercing, or you can shuffle a random card in your opponent's hand or any card on their field into the deck, then Rex gains a permanent 100 attack boost. What I don't necessarily like about this is that it's kind of a nombo with Ankylos and Plesioos if you tribute them to continue attacking, but if you just spin a card and stop attacking, then it doesn't much matter, especially if you just pendulum summon back the monsters you tributed. In fact, Rex really emphasizes what the pendulum mechanic does for the theme. Proper use of it will give Rex a whole bunch of bonuses, and then you still get to keep your field presence. What a terribly useful lizard. Dinomist Spinos is a scale 3 with 2500 attack and 1800 defense. Like Rex, Spinos contribute Dinomist monsters for effects, but you activate them during your main phase 1 instead of your battle phase. You can either have Spinos attack directly that turn, attack twice that turn, or if you activate it twice, both. Yeah, that's 5,000 points of direct damage, and that's pretty funny if your opponents resolve the Solemn Judgment that game. Spinos is the real terror of the deck. At the drop of a hat, you can potentially end the game, so your opponent's gonna have to keep their shields up at all times, lest they leave themselves vulnerable to Spinos bursting out of the water to take a huge chunk out of their life points, which is a pretty spineless play if I'm being honest. Alright, now it's time for the spells and traps. Dinomist Charge is a continuous spell that's kind of like our Fire Formation Tenki. It searches you a Dinomist on activation, and once per turn if any number of Dinomist cards are added from the field to your extra deck face up, you can add one of those sent cards to your hand. This card adds consistency and longevity to the deck. While adding back the card was previously more important for keeping our scales intact after they got busted, with the advent of Master Rule 5, it's doubly important for helping with our pendulum summons proper. While you're limited to the amount of monsters you can special summon from the extra deck, the amount of monsters you can summon from your hand has no such restrictions, and considering the amount of helpful passive effects you can get from them, it's a great way to turbocharge your plays. Dinomist Rush is one of my favorite cards in the theme. It's a normal trap that summons any Dinomist from your deck, and it is destroyed during the end phase, but it does become unaffected by every other card's effect while it's on the field. So if you just need a blocker to survive a turn, another attacker to close out games, or just add another effect to your board like Ankylos or Plesio's, then this card has your back until they explode. And because they're pendulum monsters, they won't be gone for long. I mean, have you ever resolved this card? It's quite a rush. Dynamic Power Load is a field spell that grants all your Dinomists a 300 attack and defense boost, and shuts off your opponent's ability to activate cards or effects whenever your Dinomists attack until the end of the damage step. Now, I've already gone into how much I love Armade's effects like this before, but to keep it short and sweet for here, as long as you have effects that activate during that window, they're gonna resolve without a hitch because your opponent can't respond to them. But the problem is that it doesn't do anything to advance your strategy, so you don't want to play too many copies. It would make for a decent searchable one-of as a way to secure a game-winning push, but it suffers from laughs. And because I know you've all gone to the latest medical applications of Trading Card Game Symposium, I know I don't have to explain that's short for Lore Archetype Field Spell Syndrome, and it refers to the fact that just about every field spell in the Dracoslayer storyline isn't actually name-stamped as part of the theme, making it an illegal target for any searcher the theme has, so I'm not gonna. Dinomist Eruption is probably the only card in the theme I just don't like. It's a normal trap that can be activated when any number of your Dinomist monsters are destroyed by battle or card effect, and it lets you target a card on the field and destroy it. Now, Pendulum monster cards being destroyed is as common as Burning Abyss players milling terrible cards, or Alistair Stand's opening Invocation. The activation timing isn't an issue, it happens all the time. But the issue is that Eruption doesn't check for Dinomist monster cards, it checks for Dinomist monsters, meaning that it can't be used in retaliation of your own pendulum scales being destroyed, either by your opponent or their own effects. So the only things in your deck that can trigger them is Rush when it wears off, and Stegosaur. And I guess by proxy that means anytime you smash a Dinomist into your opponent's monster, but all of that isn't very proactive. I like to use my removal before the battle phase, thank you very much, so at that point I'd rather just have the evenly matched. And you know, not for nothing, but it also shows Brachion violently exploding for no reason, and no one wants to see that. What we do want to see is probably the best card in the entire theme, and that's Dinomist Howling. It's a continuous trap that, when activated, allows you to set 1 or 2 Dinomists from your deck to your Pendulum Zone, but you're locked out of Pendulum summoning anything until the end of your next turn, save for Dinomist monsters. So don't think you can be clever, like I did, thinking you can activate this on your opponent's turn to avoid that restriction. We're playing by Dogmatica punishment rules here. But thankfully, it doesn't lock out any other kind of summon, so it's not that bad. Also, once per turn, if Howling is already face up in the spell and trap zone, you can tribute a Dinomist you control and target a card your opponent controls and bounce it to the hand. That's right, we've got a repeatable compulsory evacuation device for any card that can be targeted, great for blanking recently set back row during the end phase, and being hard removal against extra deck monsters. I really wish it didn't have its restrictions though. I suppose the first one is to keep any other Pendulum strategy with similar levels from having a 1-card scale that's slower than Pendulum Call, and the already face up in the spell and trap zone part is to keep it from retaliating if your opponent tries to pop it immediately after it's revealed. These drawbacks just seem arbitrary to ensure that Dinomist doesn't accidentally become some kind of tiered threat, and that kind of indignancy really has me howling. So that's all for the Dinomist cards, but what do we do with them? Well, big monsters with big battle effects means we are full-time aggro. We want to swarm and strike for Buku's damage as soon as possible without giving our opponent time to make any Jurassic Park references. But what can we add to help them out? They aren't part of the theme proper, so I didn't add it previously, but it is connected via lore, so I'd be remiss if I didn't include Dinoster Power, the mighty Dracoslayer, and yeah, it's hella useful. While Luster's scale is a lackluster, Masters fits just fine, and Dinoster will help keep your scale safe whenever Twin Twisters is making waves in a format. Though, don't expect it to help now. It stops destruction, but not targeting, so thanks, Cosmic Cyclone. This is one of the few machine decks that I feel warrants the usage of limiter removal. A lot of them are already stupid good at the beatdown like Cyber Dragons and Trains, but a Spinos with all the fixins plus limiter removal is 10,000 points of direct attacking damage. It's also one of those cards that scales exponentially the more monsters you have, and you know, we are a pendulum theme. It's just a shame that it's limited to 1, so it's not very consistent.
Oh bother. Sir, you may wish to double check your data. Limiter removal is Currently unlimited.
What? Since when?
January of 2019, as it turns out, and I must say I'm rather fond of the change. I've never felt so spry. Nothing like the unlocking of your speedometer to make one feel like a prototype again.
Huh. Good for them. Also, we've got level 5 machines, and that means Cyber Dragon Infinity access. And you know me, I can't pass up the opportunity to run a card with Nova in its name. CDI isn't as threatening as it was in the Breakers of Shadow days, but Dinomist lack any good turn 1 plays, so at least you have a single Omni Negate to help you out. Now, if only our Dinomist pendulums protected any machine monster. Rescue Hamster is a pretty good candidate for inclusion here as well. All of your pendulums are level 5 and under, so if you have enough monsters left in your deck to activate, it can provide the materials for CDI, as well as other rank 4s like Gear Gigant X for a search, or Tornado Dragon for back row removal. You can even make Link 2s with it, probably the most appropriate for the theme being Clifford Genius. It negates troublesome cards and can search you a level 5 Dinomist after you pendulum summon. It can also help you link climb into what I feel is one of the most important extra deck monsters you can use, Zephyra Metaltron. I will not go on a lore rant right now. Importantly, as a pendulum deck, you need link arrows now more than ever, and since we don't have an in-archetype monster that can help with that, Zephyra is here to pick up the slack. 3 down arrows makes for very profitable pendulum summons, can help you recover resources when your opponent goes to smash your dinos, and can clear the way for your attacks by banishing extra deck summoned monsters. It's very narrow and temporary removal, I admit, but we're playing it for the arrows, not for the effect. Well, alternatively, we could just bite the bullet and play Luster Pendulum. Scales be damned, we can still use it to make Halqifibrax, summon Effect Veiler, then make Selene. Heck, adding Luster also gives you access to all the Dracoslayer extra deck monsters, but that takes committing a bit more main deck space to the combo, so I would recommend going with whichever Link 3 suits your particular build best. As for a silly tech pick, I think Pendulum Paradox would be a nice spell to add. I would say Pendulum Switch, but since we have to share the Pendulum zones with the spell and trap zones, we can't really afford the room. Especially since we already have a continuous spell and trap we want to be playing. Paradox doesn't stick around, and while it's going to add 2 monsters of the same scale, so no 1-card scale formation here, we do need to add as many of these Misty Mechs to our hand as possible to optimize our pendulum summons. And that's all I've got to say about Dinomists. They have some very strong, straightforward gameplay that looks to shut out a game as soon as possible with some good old big monster smash tactics, but looking at it in context of the game as it is now, it's going to be struggling. It lacks the kind of explosive 1-card starters that gets you into the game as quickly as other decks, and even when it does get its engines going, its ceiling is actually quite low. You're great at punching a hole in your opponent's life points, but not much else. You don't have the repeatability and oppressiveness of an Eldritch variant's back row, the instant win button of a bird up deck, or the versatility of Virtual World. But despite all that, it's still super fun to play, especially when it comes to harnessing that Dino DNA.
No, bad Nova.
No.
They're machines,
Stop.
not dinosaurs, and that also means they don't have DNA. Get your act together.
Anyway, now I'd like to hear what you all have to say. Do you all agree that Dinomist still needs an overhaul, or are they already the apex predator? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video around. It really does a lot to help me out. And if you want to see any more Dracoslayer related content, you can follow this link to see my video all about the lore of the Dracoslayer storyline. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Greetings, future subjects. It is I, Elblich the Golden Lord. Begin the ritualistic worship of my very being, supplicants, for the time of my ascension is nigh.
Alright, what's going on here?
Your consciousness begins to stir. I see you finally regained your stamina after that 36-hour marathon of Hades.
Yeah, and I would have gotten a 37 if I hadn't run out of energy drinks and... Wait, are you possessing my body again?
Indeed. My power has yet to fully recuperate, especially after our first encounter, and yours is the only body that I can seem to keep a handle on. I tried possessing Delilah, but that lady's mind is more treacherous than my old haunt.
That's what I love about her. But why now?
Because All Hallows Eve approaches, a time where the occult and supernatural take center stage in the minds of mortals. And it is with the power of this collective unconscious that I am once again given form.
And I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that the channel's being monetized now, is it?
Look, I'm a gold-plated feudal lord. What do you think?
Fair enough. Well, if you're done pressing my audience into servitude now, I've got a video to host. Now that I've finished Genesis Impactors, I've got to catch up on all the new Blazing Vortex stuff.
Nonsense. You have more pressing archetypes to cover.
Excuse you? The people expect me to be on the cutting edge of new releases, dictating my thoughts and advice on the latest trends.
Yes, your punctuality is what you're known for. This must be the comedy everyone's so fond of. Tell me, when did you last check the time?
I mean, I suppose I wasn't really paying attention to it while I was gaming, and I guess I was just passed out for a while, and... Oh no, is it...
Friday! Yes, how very astute of you. And how's that next script coming along?
Someone get Chaz on the line. We can improvise an Armed Dragon Thunder video before curtain call, right?
You and I both know that pompous playboy and his Ojama entourage won't get here in time, but it just so happens that I have some scripts for you right here.
What?
That's right. Just sign here and you'll have a month's worth of scripts to work on right now.
Well, I'm sure I'll only need the one to get back on.
And you can spend all that time you would have on script writing on playing more Hades.
Thank you, Eldritch, such an upstanding undead member of our society. You're a real champ, you know that?
No bother at all. It's a pleasure doing business with you. I'm sure you'll find the contents to die for.
Ooh, flipping through dimensions feels weird, like swimming through a pool of silly putty. Anyway, no time to contemplate the consequences of my actions. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and today, as well as for the foreseeable future, we'll be talking about some spooky archetypes to celebrate this most magnificent of months, Halloween. Let's start this themed month with the scariest thing I can think of. Now, I'm not very big into horror, so I'm not very entrenched in the scene, but I can tell you that something that will always get to me is body horror. No worries, I won't be showing any non-Yu-Gi-Oh related examples, because if I don't want to see it, I certainly don't want to subject you to it. But despite how gruesome it is, there's something darkly fascinating about it. The genre forces us to confront what our bodies can be made to resemble, shattering our self-image and calling into question our rigid, static forms. While extremely exaggerated, body horror gives us a chance to confront the fact that we are not impervious, immortal beings. One day, we will change. And it may be for the worse. And somehow, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has an archetype that has exactly that. Released in Shining Victories, the final core set of the second year of Pendulums, Amorphages were the story archetype that capped off that year's lore, bringing the fledgling Dracoslayer face to face with their destined rival. And they sure don't shy away from what Lecter Pendulum has done to build up their army of Draco fiends. After sticking a host animal with a virus-shaped device, the creature is slowly converted into a dragon, which I cannot imagine feels very comfortable. And it doesn't matter what gets polymorphed, they'll take anything. They infected a fly for crying out loud. Regardless of the base monster, their dragon forms all share some similar traits. They all appear to be Western-style dragons, with large rigid plates of sharp-looking scales as armor. The color of these scales also seem to be dependent on the color of the virus device attached to them. But their most unique, horrifying identifier, aside from the fact that they're bursting out of animals, are these sunken eye sockets around the body, always in a teardrop shape. We'll get into the lore implications of this in a later video, but for now, I think it's time to go into the video proper. Let's review our culture samples, identify our primary vector towards victory, and see what other support cards we can mold to our will. It's time to acclimate to Amorphages. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. That way you can stay up to date on new releases, and my brain makes the happy juice when good number go up. Oh, and ringing the bell is a pretty good way to stay on top of things as well. Analysis videos like this tend to do pretty well, but if you like any of my other series like my field tests and dream theme, that's a pretty good way to make sure you catch them, as well as my Friday live streams. We also have a Discord where you can hang out with the rest of the community as we try to comprehend the oddity that is Ojama Pink, and you can also follow me on Twitter if you want to stay up to date on channel updates and my bad takes. Thank you for your patience, and now, back to the video. Amorphages are all Pendulum Earth Dragon monsters. If they're level 4 or below, they stop both players from special summoning from the extra deck, except for Amorphages, as long as they were either Pendulum summoned or flipped face up. The rest provide the same lockout, no matter how they were summoned.
Their pendulum effects are all some kind of floodgate, but there's a catch. You have to be controlling an Amorphage monster to make them live, and they require the tribute of a monster during each of your standby phases, or else they're destroyed. Let's start with the lowest levels and work our way up. Amorphage Gluttony is a level 2 monster with 0 attack and 1850 defense. They have a scale of 5, and as a pendulum spell, they keep both players from activating monster effects except Amorphage ones. This one's a pretty good example to lead with because it highlights a few more things about the deck I want to point out. First, all the monsters have that 50 at the end of their stat line, which is more lore stuff that we'll get into down the line. But the big thing is, if you've noticed from other examples so far, the low scale of this theme is 3. Yeah, out of the entire pendulum archetype, only half of them can be pendulum summoned using them. That's just great. Really flies in the face of conventional design. Next is Amorphage Lechery, a level 2 monster with 1350 attack and 0 defense. They have a scale of 5, and as a pendulum spell, neither player can activate spell cards or effects, except for Amorphage cards. Now, putting aside the fact that I've been hit by this more times than I care to admit, what I find funny is that it's another example of how disjointed this archetype can be. See, the theme has 2 support spells if you don't count the pendulums, but only one of them is name tagged as Amorphage. Yeah, Lechery shuts off Amorphous Persona. Thankfully, the effect to draw doesn't activate, but if you don't already have it on the board or want to use its grave effect, you're gonna have to find a way to turn off Lechery before you can access it, and that really stings. Amorphage Envy is a level 4 monster with 0 attack and 2050 defense. They have a scale of 5, and as a pendulum spell, neither player can activate cards at chain link 2 or higher. That's probably the most interesting and creative card out of the bunch, to be honest. It basically turns off any form of negation, though your opponent can still respond to things like inherent summons or attacks, as those don't start chains. But in the hand trap and negation heavy environment we find ourselves in today, Envy gives you a tool that's particularly helpful in setting up your board while putting a chokehold on your opponents. Also, bonus, it's an Inkling, who doesn't like those? Amorphage Greed is a level 4 monster with 0 attack and 1950 defense. They have a scale of 3, and as a pendulum spell, they keep both players from activating trap cards or effects except Amorphage cards. This one is probably the least useful of the archetype, at least until a big trap revolution sweeps the player base. One part of me says to keep this in the side deck for the Altergeist matchup, but it is a much needed low scale and one of your few pendulum summonable Amorphages, so you're gonna have to run them if only for the body. It's the best way I can think of to hedge your bets. Amorphage Pride is a level 4 monster with 1750 attack and 0 defense. They have a scale of 3, and as a pendulum spell, they prevent either player from taking effect damage. Okay, scratch what I said earlier, at least Greed can stop things like Imperm and Evenly Matched. Pride is such a narrow floodgate that it's almost a vanilla. But they are a level 4 and have a low scale, so not running them isn't an option. However, at this point you've no doubt noticed another connection among the Amorphages. So far, they've all been named after the 7 deadly sins, using a thesaurus on one of them to appease the censors. Very fitting for the final boss to have minions named like this, and the eagle for Pride is pretty appropriate, though that is from an American perspective. What I don't get is, why isn't this one blue and Envy green? Huge missed opportunity. Amorphage Wrath is a level 4 monster with 1650 attack and 0 defense. They have a scale of 3, and as a pendulum spell, they keep either player from tributing any monsters except for Amorphages. This is surprisingly more relevant now with the new wave of pilots using Monarchs because of the ban list, but it's actually entirely useless against the kinds of cards you'd want protection from. For instance, if your opponent Nibiru's you, it will take out all of your Amorphages, but let them keep all their monsters, because Nibiru only has to tribute as many as possible. However, if Drytrons ever become relevant, this is the perfect card to floodgate them with. It'll certainly give them pause for concern. Oh, that poor wolf. Now it's time to move on to the larger ones. Amorphage Sloth is a level 6 monster with 2250 attack and 0 defense. They have a scale of 3, and as a pendulum spell, they keep both players from adding cards from their deck to their hand, except by drawing them. Now that's an effect to get excited about. Having a deck lockdown can pull the brakes on any theme that needs to sculpt their hands. And while some more modern card design gets around this, I'm looking at you, Adamantia, there's always going to be a need for effects that put the right card in your hand at the right time. And if they don't already have it, Sloth is here to tell your opponent to bear with it. Our last on-theme monster is Amorphage Goliath,
a level 8 monster with 2750 attack and 0 defense. They have a scale of 5, and as a pendulum spell, they make it so any card sent to the grave is banished instead, except for Amorphage cards. Holy cannoli, having an on-theme Macrocosmos is pretty insane. It's also seen its fair share of non-Amorphage use, being a target for a number of dragon special summons to cap off an impressive board. It's basically the beta version of the Buster Dragonlock. It's also noticeably the only Amorphage without an associated sin, so I did a bit of digging and found that their OCG name is Irritum, which is a Latin word for, among other things, vanity. And wouldn't you know it, an older version of the cardinal sins was a list of 8, including the one that was folded into Pride to make the list we know today, Vainglory. It doesn't have anything to do with the mechanics of the card, but it wouldn't be a Nova video if I didn't go off on a huge tangent. Besides, it's a Macrocosmos, what else do you want? Let's move on to the support cards. Amorphage Infection is a continuous spell that grants all of your Amorphage monsters a 100 attack and defense boost for every Amorphage card on the field. If a monster or monsters you control or in your hand are tributed or destroyed, you can add an Amorphage card from your deck to your hand, unless you have Sloth active, in which case, don't even think about it. A bit slow of a searcher, but lacking any other way to collect your most needed pieces, it'll have to do. The attack boost also counts cards, not monsters, so Infection and your Pendulum scales all count towards the boost as well, which is a nice touch, especially considering the stats on some of these abominations. It's probably the card you'll want to see in your opening hand most often, but it feels weird saying that you want an Infection. Amorphage Lysis is a continuous trap that reduces the attack and defense of every monster on the field, except Amorphages, by 100 for every Amorphage card on the field. Also, if a card in your Pendulum Zone is destroyed, you can place an Amorphage Pendulum monster from your deck to a Pendulum Zone. This one is a little less useful than Infection, especially because it's a trap card, but it's stupendous at keeping your scales up in response to removal. It's also a good way to get around the Sloth lock, and can be used to cycle into the scales that you really want. It's also just a real gross looking card. Like, I thought dragons bursting out of animals was bad, but then you have to make them melt? I would say like ice cream, but I may actually scream. The last support card is Amorphous Persona, a field spell that grants all your Amorphages a 300 attack and defense boost, not unlike the other field spells in this storyline. Up to twice per turn, you draw a card whenever one of the Amorphages you control are tributed. This can help to mitigate their pendulum upkeep costs, and you can even double dip that advantage since you can just pendulum summon them right back. You can also banish Persona from your grave and tribute pendulum monsters from your hand or field whose level equals exactly 8, then ritual summon one Amorphactor Pain, the Imagination Drake Overlord, from your hand. Yeah, that's right, the deck with no dedicated ritual spell has a field spell that can do it from the grave. But what is this mystery ritual monster the card speaks of? Amorphactor Pain, the Imagination Drake Overlord, is a level 8 Earth Dragon ritual monster with 2950 attack and 2500 defense. Oh, hey, 2 stats that aren't 0, that's new. If they're ritual summoned, your opponent skips their next main phase 1, which can be an absolutely hilarious way to start a game. If your opponent doesn't have a developed field, then you may get to skip their battle phase as well so they can start assembling it. Also, the effects of face-up fusion, synchro, and Xyz monsters are negated while they're on the field, as long as a Morphactor prowls across the board. Last, if they're sent from the field to the grave, you can add a Dracoverlord monster from your deck to your hand, except another copy of itself. This monster's really cool, but it's another example of how disjointed the card design is in this archetype. It's not an Amorphage, so you can't search it with Infection, it's vulnerable to all your own floodgates, and I can't stress this enough, it's a ritual monster in a theme that doesn't have a dedicated ritual spell. In fact, if Amorphous Persona wasn't the way to summon a Morphactor, there'd be no mechanical connection to Amorphages. Their name is weird, but oddly appropriate. If you can splash this into another deck that can generically summon them, they're a force to be reckoned with. But for Amorphages, just keep it in your imagination. So we've covered all the relevant cards for the theme. What's our goal? Well, the name of the game seems to be Control. We'll want to grab the Amorphage most appropriate for the job at hand, and that usually means Gluttony, limit our opponent's options, then accrue as much advantage as possible through our support spells and traps before crushing them with Goliath. But what mutations can we bring to the table to set our plans in motion? Something to keep in mind is that while our scales are very narrow, they don't restrict our summons, so we'll want to look into level 4 pendulum monsters that synergize well with us and perhaps provide us with some more forgiving scales. Funnily enough, Our most staunch ally might be in Performapals. Coin Dragon doesn't really enhance our scales, but it can turn any of our Amorphages special summoned from the extra deck into a DD Warrior Lady for the turn, offering outstanding removal against otherwise very sticky monsters. And as a monster, it grants all your other dragons, read Amorphages, effect destruction immunity, and a little 500 attack boost. Since our floodgates need you to have at least one Amorphage monster on board, your opponent will try to pick them off so they don't have to play under them, and our little friend here can help dissuade such attempts. If you can land them on the field, you're in for a huge payout. Supreme King Dragon Darkworm is another really good inclusion. As a scale 5, they're certainly not hurting the ones you already use, but they can fetch you even better ones. The Supreme King gates allow for the largest possible scales in the game, and while Infinity has a pretty nasty restriction, it does allow us to pendulum summon the mighty Sloth and Goliath, and you'll likely be tributing away monsters to keep up your scales anyhow. And if you use Gate 0, then hey, you get to summon back all your level 2s that you couldn't have beforehand, which is great because they're much better in defense position. And since they're a dragon, they'll overlap with all the other dragon support you'll be running anyway. I imagine it'll worm its way into a few builds. This might be the deck to make Pendulum Halt work. Aside from Infection, you're not adding a lot of cards from your deck to your hand, and with all the monsters you have to tribute to keep your scales going, this might give you the gas you need to get going. Just don't run too many of them, or the only thing it'll be halting is your plays. And that's all I've got to say for Amorphages. If any deck needed legacy support, it's this one. There's a competent control strategy in here somewhere, it just needs more cards that work for the deck, not against it. Maybe an actual dedicated ritual spell for the theme? Let you use monsters in your pendulum zone as tribute material? Or a link monster to help keep your field stocked? I really do believe that with just the right support, this oppressive powerhouse lorded over by the Dracoverlord can be a real sick pick. But now, I want to hear what you have to say about the deck. Do you agree that Amorphages are going to need some more time to incubate? Or do they already possess the right stuff to crush card the competition? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to help even more, make sure to check out the description. I've got a Twitter, Discord, TCG Player affiliate link, all that good stuff. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you next time. Now then, time for another Hades run.
What in blazes? Where am I? The last thing I remember is...
Hello, Vector. A pleasure to make your acquaintance.
Who goes there?
A friend. One that has some... big plans in store.
Gleaming golden buggies and silver sublight speed jets come together to form one of the most powerful pendulum decks ever made on today's episode. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Today, it's time to fulfill a request from this month's Quasar Commander, and they've picked a topic that ties in with our most recent lore video, which you can find right here. Several archetypes make up the Dracoslayer storyline, not least of which being Dracoslayers. But one of the most impactful, especially when it came to pendulums, was Metalfoes. Premiering in the August 2016 core set, The Dark Illusion, these fast, fierce, and fiery warriors began the third year that pendulums had been implemented, and they were going to blow the doors off that mechanic. And considering this was after the infamous Performage pendulum format, that's saying something. So let's put these cards on the scale to see how they weigh in, see how they normally work, then see if they can gather enough spoons to outdo Mega Alakazam. It's time to pop off with Metalfoes. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and there's no better way to get there than on our dual runners. Our next stop is 40k, which means Leo and Luna Explained, where we'll be covering Ancient Fairy Dragon's companions, the Power Tool Dragons, Morphtronics, and any other cards that are more than meets the eye. We've also got our Discord, where we now have Space Boats. I also have a Twitch where you can join me for viewer duels, progression polls pulls, and chaos draft pulls for the foreseeable future. And don't forget about my Patreon, where you can gain access to my videos early, reach some of these milestones, as well as helping to determine which videos I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So what's the deal with Metalfoes? Well, they're a series of fire attribute psychic type pendulum monsters, and they're one in a long line of themes that benefit from blowing up their own cards. However, unlike Fire Kings or Cosmos, they don't usually draw so much on triggering effects when destroyed, though there are a few. Rather, they leverage the power of Pendulum to destroy their own cards, swap them out for other powerful ones, then revive some destroyed monsters with the power of Pendulum to keep their resources flowing, especially so they can be used for fusion summons, and eventually, Link summons. Notably, their scales are also incredibly powerful, being either 1 or 8 without applying any restrictions, making them one of, if not the, most powerful generic set of scales in the game. And while this still meant you couldn't pendulum back levels 1 and 8s, the 2 through 7 lineup was still an incredible roster to pull from. A majority of them also share the same pendulum effect. Once per turn, you can target one other face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do, set a Metalfoes spell or trap card directly from your deck. This gives you unprecedented access to this deck's many support cards, including its fusion spells. Firstly, let's go over the initial wave of main deck Metalfoes, who are all normal monsters. And to show them off, I've prepared a little ditty. I am the very model of a modern normal pendulum. I help combos by maintaining numeric equilibrium with scales small like Evil Heel and large like this comedian to summon cards from Capsule to Miss Valley, Apex Avian. My flavor text is balanced by effects that are quite radical. Destroying cards for others more immediately practical. Our monsters show their psychic cause their vehicles are full of spoons. Spoons. Spoons full of spoons. Despite the fact that it makes one look like a bumbling buffoon. Despite the fact that it makes one look like a bumbling buffoon. Despite the fact that it makes one look like a bumbling buffoon. Despite the fact that it makes one look like a bumbling buffoon. My fusion spells are numerous and often rather boisterous, saying nothing of our links with power bordering disastrous. I help combos by maintaining numeric equilibrium. I am the very model of a modern normal pendulum. He helps combos by maintaining numeric equilibrium. He is the very model of a modern normal pendulum. Got all that? Good. From now on, all of our Metalfoes will actually be effect monsters, though the pendulum effects won't change. Rare Metalfoes Bismugear is a level 1 monster with 0 attack and defense with a scale of 8, and if this card on the field is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can add a Metalfoes monster from your deck to your hand during the end phase of this turn. Note that the activation colon is set right after Bismugear is destroyed, and not during the end phase. This makes it an effect that activates on destruction, but doesn't come into play until later, meaning you can move Bismugear to any other zone and still get that effect, which is very useful, though you will want to make sure you keep a reminder on hand so neither you nor your opponent miss the search, because unlike an effect like Scarms, once it's in motion, it has to resolve. And thankfully, or not thankfully depending on your stance, this is a hard once per turn, so you can't blow up multiple Bismugear to get multiple searches, or find a way to get this out of your face-up extra deck and blow it up all over again to trigger the effect again. Suffice it to say, the designers learned their lessons after printing XX Saber Dark Soul. Parametalfoes Melcaster is a level 7 monster with 2000 attack and 2500 defense with a scale of 1, and if this card on the field is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can add a face-up Metalfoes Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, except a copy of itself, but you cannot activate it, or cards with its same name, to place it in the Pendulum zones for the rest of the turn, except by a card effect. This is a pretty neat way to recycle Bismugear, since you sure as heck aren't pendulum summoning it back without the help of a Supreme King, the Arc V one, and having another level 7 in the cast means we have even easier access to rank 7s, most importantly being Odd Eye's Absolute Dragon, which is another example of fire and ice working really well together despite their differences in relative temperatures. Metalfoes Vanisher is probably the strangest member of the cast. It's a level 9 monster with 2900 attack and 1900 defense with a scale of 1, and as a pendulum spell, if any number of monsters you control are destroyed by a battle or card effect, except during the damage step, you can add a Metalfoes card from your grave to your hand, except a copy of itself. And while it's a monster, while this card is in your hand, Vanisher can target 2 face-up cards you control, including a Metalfoes card, destroy him, and if you do, special summon this card from the hand. And if this card is special summoned by the effect of a Metalfoes card, you can target a monster your opponent controls or in their grave and banish it. So it's way too high level to be pendulum summoned, and it doesn't even follow the usual pendulum effect, so what gives? Well, this is presumably in response to the defeat of the True King of all calamities and their 3 associated True King monsters. One was Agni Mazud the Vanisher, which this card takes its level and stat line from, as well as being able to special summon themselves in a similar manner, as well as having a similar banishing effect. Now, we're no strangers to destroying our own cards, but normally we try to do that as a way to advance our combos, though being able to banish a monster ain't too shabby. And heck, that's not even necessary to do, as we actually have access to a few Metalfoes effects that can special summon Vanisher, so you don't have to worry about popping your own cards if you don't want to. Which is good, because if you keep feeding this, then your card advantage is just gonna vanish. Alright, that's all of our main deck monsters, now it's time to talk about fusions. And like the early Metalfoes, we've got a few non-effect monsters to cover first. Adamant is a level 5 monster with 2500 attack and defense, and requires any Metalfoes monster and another monster with 2500 or less attack. Crimsonite is a level 9 monster with 3000 attack and defense, requiring a Metalfoes monster and 2 monsters with 3000 or less attack. Now, these aren't super notable on their own, save for the fact that this is another option you can utilize if you're splashing in another theme. Not only can you bring in monsters you can pendulum summon with those sweet 1 to 8 scales, you can also generally use them as fusion material for these heckin' chonkers. But the best part is how well they work as super poly targets. Selecting a range of attack is probably the most generic requirement you could ever put on an extra deck monster, aside from saying you just need a monster. This means Crimsonite is basically the lava golem of fusion monsters, though it's you that gets to keep the big fiery monster, while Adamant can act as a kaiju on less developed fields. Though your results may vary on this one, as a single lone monster is probably going to have a higher attack than 2500. Despite that, these cards don't see a lot of play nowadays due to their lack of utility, and I can see why that is, but I'm confident we can see a resurgence in their usage with the right utensilization. Full Metalfoes Alcahest is a level 1 monster with 0 attack and defense, requiring a Metalfoes monster and a normal monster as material, and must be fusion summoned. Once per turn during your opponent's turn as a quick effect, you can target an effect monster on the field and equip that target to this card. This card gains defense equal to the combined original attack of the monsters equipped to it by this effect, and you can use monsters you control equipped to this card you control as material for the fusion summon of a Metalfoes fusion monster that lists them as material. So on the surface, this is basically relinquished at quick effect speed, which is ridiculously annoying to deal with. Unless your opponent has a token or a normal monster that can just run over this, the second someone fields a decently useful effect monster, Alcahest just scoops it right up and makes it so the owner can't use it, and provides a nifty defense buff. Heck, you can even scoop up your own monsters if you want to, just to keep Alcahest safe. Using the absorbed monster as fusion material is usually of secondary concern, but it's still nice to have if what you take happens to line up with a monster you want a fusion summon for. Though be careful, because a lot of monsters will have grave effects that trigger even if they're sent from the field as a spell card. But one of my favorite things is that every time I see this, I want to sound like those ad bumpers for Full Metal Alchemist. Like, watch this. Full Metalfoes Alcahest. Full Metalfoes Alcahest. Uncanny, right? Metalfoes Mithrilium is a level 6 monster with 2600 attack and 1000 defense, requiring a Metalfoes monster and a Pendulum monster as material. It can target 2 Metalfoes cards in your grave and 1 card on the field, shuffling the targets from your grave into the deck, and if you do, return the target on the field to the hand. And if this card is sent from the field to the grave, you can special summon a Metalfoes Pendulum monster from your grave or face up extra deck. This monster combines a great stat line with removal and a little bit of utility. See, it doesn't just bounce your opponent's cards, but yours as well. So let's say you use your Metalfoes Pendulum effects to set a quick play spell card from your deck, but because of game mechanics, you can't actually use it that turn. Unlike a normal spell, quick play spells obey trap card rules once set. But if you bounce it back to your hand with Mithrilium, you can use it immediately. And if you end up using Mithrilium as material, or it just goes from the field to the grave in general, you get a Reborn. This makes Metalfoes Vanisher an exceedingly good piece of fusion material, because it'll come right back once Mithrilium leaves the field, banishing a monster. Also, I've gotta point out that Mithrilium's guns are their vehicle's handles, right down to using the brake lever as the trigger. Have I mentioned that I love Yu-Gi-Oh art? Parametalfoes Azortless is a level 7 fusion pendulum monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense with a scale of 8, requiring a Metalfoes monster and a fusion monster as material. As a pendulum spell, if any number of face-up Metalfoes cards you control are destroyed by card effect, except during the damage step, you can target a face-up card on the field and destroy it. And as a monster, if this card is special summoned from the extra deck, which generally means fusion or pendulum summoning, you can target a card your opponent controls, shuffle 2 face-up pendulum monsters from your extra deck into the deck, and if you do, destroy that card. and if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place it in your pendulum zone. This is one of our coolest fusions, if not the least used. Turns out using a fusion monster as material isn't exactly the most cost efficient. And unfortunately, its removal effects aren't really what the deck needs. But should the format call for removal, Azorius makes for some fantastic repeatable destruction, especially now that pendulum summoning is a lot more restrictive, and you don't need to maintain a hugely stacked extra deck for massive pendulum summons. In fact, you could say that the emphasis on it has Azort lessened. Metalfoes Orichalc is a level 8 monster with 2800 attack and 2200 defense, requiring any 2 Metalfoes monsters as material. That's right, no dabbling in outside themes. For Orichalc, you need to be dedicated to the cause. All your Metalfoes monsters deal double piercing battle damage, which is, wow. And if this card is sent from the field to the grave, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. This is a massive damage enabler that has a bit of an insurance policy baked right in. If your opponent is on the defensive, you can severely punish them, and Orichalc can either destroy something in retaliation if your opponent blasts it, or you can use it as link or fusion material to be a bit more proactive. So, when trying to use this card to the fullest, you'll want to stop and ask yourself a few questions. That rounds out our fusion monsters, but the extra deck isn't done yet, because we've got the next thing any good pendulum deck needs to deal with the current master rule: Link monsters. And the most infamous of them all is Heavy Metalfoes Electromite, a Link 2 monster with 1800 attack, requiring any 2 pendulum monsters as material. If this card is Link summoned, you can add any pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up, effectively acting as a foolish burial for an entire subsection of monsters. And once per turn, you can target one other face up card you control, destroy it, then add a face up pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. And if any number of cards in your pendulum zones leave the field, you draw a card. And wowee, did this card get out of hand immediately. Basically, every part of this card combos with itself. By sending a pendulum monster to your face-up extra deck, you set it up to be recovered by Electromite's second effect, and if you blow up one of your pendulum scales for that effect, that feeds into Electromite's third effect, drawing you a card. This was ridiculously powerful on release, combining with Pendulum Magicians to great effect. You could add Double Iris Magician into the mix, searching out your powerful Pendulum Graph cards, extend with Black Fang Magician, get removal with Purple Poison Magician, and then using Electromite as link material after it was used to get even more powerful link monsters with better arrows. And that's without talking about any of the Endymion Pendulum cards. It was ridiculous, but despite all that, there are people who still ask for it to be unbanned to this day, citing power creep making this not as powerful. In fact, there are so many fans of Pendulum that want this card off the ban list that I think it's about time we brought back an old segment, Escape the Vault. Can Electromite escape the Forbidden Sect? No. But every classic has its cheap imitation. Heavy Metalfoes Amalgam is a Link 2 monster with 2000 attack, requiring 2 Metalfoes monsters as material. If this card is sent from the monster zone to the grave by a card effect, you can activate one of these effects. Either target a Metalfoes monster you control, equip it with this card, and it gains 1000 attack, or target a Metalfoes card you control, destroy it, and if you do, special summon this card. So this allows you to handle a couple of different scenarios. One is turning Amalgam into an Axe of Despair to help you get over big things you'd have trouble getting over otherwise. The second is giving you the biggest pendulum summon you've ever had. Since Amalgam has 2 side pointing arrows, it's not very useful in the EMZ. But use it as fusion material, or blow it up with your pendulum scales, revive it with its own effect, and now it's in the main monster zone, giving you 2 more zones you can pendulum summon to. It also helps give you a repeatable monster to use as fusion material, which is also pretty useful. However, it lacks any way to set up those plays like Electromite did, so it's nowhere close to replacing the old legend, no matter how many cool fire swords you bring to the table. Alright, that's all the monsters, and now it's time for the spells and traps, and we'll be starting with another iconic card, Metalfoes Fusion, a normal spell that fusion summons a Metalfoes fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as material. And if this card is in your grave, you can shuffle it into your deck, then draw a card. In Archetype, this makes for a great repeatable source of extra deck access, since you can search it out with your pendulum effects, shuffle it back into your deck, and get it back with your pendulums again. but the effect that gives you a draw means it's seen inclusion in a number of decks that love the grave. Archetypes that discard and mill love the chance to shunt this into the grave to give you what amounts to an upstart goblin. It was especially strong in Sky Strikers, as you could use Foolish Burial Goods to load this into your grave, getting you that much closer to your bonus effects, and once you had 4 or more and didn't need to worry about reaching that threshold, you could just shuffle back Metalfoes Fusion to make up for the lost card. Basically, this card is loved by everyone, so it's hard to see how it would make any foes. Parametalfoes Fusion is a normal spell that fusion summons a Metalfoes Fusion monster from your extra deck, using up to 1 monster each from your hand, field, and or face-up extra deck as fusion material. Now this is some good fusion power. Most of the material you use will end up in the grave instead of the extra deck, but as we touched on before, it's not quite as imperative that we maintain a stockpile of pendulum monsters. So sending a few to the grave isn't bad, especially if we send them from the face-up extra deck, which doesn't have any kind of restriction on where monsters can be summoned from. And with Mithrilium, you'll easily be able to bring those monsters back, or even use them as material to activate its first effect. So while you can sink 3 material into this to make a Crimsonite, most of the time you'll be looking for a good pair of monsters to make your Metalfoes. Full Metalfoes Fusion is a quick play spell that fusion summons a Metalfoes Fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as material. It doesn't have any extra flavor to it, but like El Shaddoll Fusion before it, the possibilities are endless. You can fuse away a monster that's about to be destroyed so you can make a new one, or fuse it away to dodge some kind of effect negation. Or fuse it during the battle phase to get even more damage. And if you use Mithrilium or Orichalc, this is a good way to use their effects on demand as well. It might take a bit of imagination, but once you get a handle on this card, you'll be able to use it to its full Metalfoes potential. Metamorph Formation is a field spell that boosts all of your Metalfoes monsters' attack and defense by 300, and while a Metalfoes card is in your Pendulum Zone, non-effect Metalfoes monsters you control are unaffected by your opponent's effects. This means that like half of our cards aren't really covered by this, which is pretty sad. But makes sense because otherwise it'd probably be hella broken. So, hey, if this is on the field, then Volflame becomes a gigantic beater that your opponent will have to find very specific answers to out, because even running it over by battle isn't even a permanent solution, since intact scales means you can just pendulum summon it right back. But I think the worst part is, like all the field spells in this lore, it's not even name stamped to match the archetype it's supposed to work with, so you can't even set it to the field with your pendulum effects, just in case you wanted to utilize your normal monsters. Some formation that ended up being. Metalfoes Counter is a normal trap that you can activate when any number of your cards are destroyed by battle or card effect, and it special summons a Metalfoes monster from your deck. And during either player's turn, except the turn this card was sent to the grave, you can banish this card from your grave to add a face-up Metalfoes Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. This is a pretty nifty all-around tool. It gets a monster on field to replace anything of yours that's destroyed, and while it can be reactive to your opponent, you can just use it when you destroy one of your own cards with your Metalfoes Pendulum effects. And if you need help resetting your scales but they're trapped in your extra deck, or you just want to have a Metalfoes in hand so you can pendulum summon them from there without worrying about the EMZ restrictions, or to even just get Bismugear back, this card has you covered. But the one thing I like most about this is how not Arc V this is, because there's nothing more 5Ds than getting really close to your motorcycle. Like really close, like uncomfortably close. Metalfoes Combination is a continuous trap card, and once per turn, if a fusion monster is fusion summoned, you can target a Metalfoes fusion monster in your grave with a lower level than that fusion monster and special summon it. And if this card is sent from the field to the grave, you can add a Metalfoes monster from your deck to your hand. While not quite as much of a standout hit as our other Metalfoes support, this card would crop up any time a theme was splashed in with Metalfoes that could destroy face-down cards. See, the downside of using your Metalfoes Pendulum effects was that it set those cards face down, meaning you couldn't pop whatever you set, like Combination. So you'd need something else to handle that for you. Some Performapal monsters were really good at this, namely Pendulum Sorcerer, but you could also just pop it with Twin Twisters if you were so inclined to turn one of its targets on yourself. And while it was used far less often, the first effect meant that you could fusion summon from your hand with no issue, because you would usually end up summoning back the monster you used as material if it was low enough level, and with Orichalc, that covered basically anything, with the only thing not under that umbrella is Vanisher, which to be fair was just recently added. So the name is quite apt, as it allows you to combine Metalfoes with a lot of different strategies. Alright, so that's all the Metalfoes cards, but what do we do with them? Well, by utilizing our unique approach to card advantage, we'll want to establish a good pendulum loop to keep our resources flowing, leveraging said resources into powerful link and fusion monsters, and maybe a few other things if we're feeling spicy, and run over our opponent with the power of value and this gun I found. So what can we play to help them out? Well, we'll want to incorporate some pendulum staples to maximize our play sequences. While we no longer have Electromite, Beyond the Pendulum is the next best thing. It gives you another pendulum monster to use and provides some great removal. However, you'll need to find a way to make this before you pendulum summon so your effects don't get locked out, and a good way to do that is with Chronograph Sorcerer. Once you blow up one of your own cards, Chronograph can be summoned from the hand, along with another monster if you so choose. And if it's a pendulum monster, you can make Beyond pretty easily. The now limited Astrograph can do something similar, though it adds from the deck to the hand instead of giving you a free summon, so you will have to eat your normal summon in that case. Then, once you've used Beyond's effects, you can pretty easily use them as a ladder up into Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. If you run any spellcasters, Effect Veiler, Magical Abductor, and the Mythical Beasts come to mind, you can revive them from your grave using all the delicious spell counters you accumulated for having pendulum scales and spells in your grave to make Access Code, everyone's favorite OTK machine. Apex Avion is also a thoroughly powerful monster to pendulum summon out, providing you with an Omni Negate, though if you want something a bit less bricky, use any 2 level 7 monsters to make Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon, then link it away to make Vortex for a tried and true negation body. For normal support, a lot of the usual suspects work well with us. Summoner's Art can get us Volflame, while Painful Decision can search us the rest of our normal crew, while loading one up in the grave to use with Mithrilium. Meanwhile, Unexpected Die can summon those same monsters out onto the field to help with Beyond the Pendulum shenanigans. Baobaboon is a wonderful piece of card selection that turns into incredible advantage with our deck. While this card doesn't net us any card advantage, we can use this to dig deeper into our deck while tucking away Garnets and getting more of our Metalfoes spells and traps. And with the 2 new Baobaboons you summon out, you can either pop them for more Metalfoes cards or use them as material for a ton of other things. You can make rank 3s, link 2s that require plants, darks, or generics. There's a lot we can do here. As for a silly tech pick, well, Tennies. We do have quite a few non-effect monsters by virtue of them being normal, so you get a lot of mileage out of your worms. Heck, even if you do control effect monsters, you can just pendulum summon the spirits right out. And that's all I have to say about Metalfoes. This is probably one of the raddest pendulum archetypes to ever see print. You can play them with just about everything due to their wide scales and broadly synergistic effects, while packing a unique punch all their own. If you ever want to experience swinging into action with a deck whose combo is only 12 steps instead of 57, then you'll feel right at home. Just, don't take the deck's themes to heart, alright? No one benefits from self-destructive behavior. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Metalfoes your new best friends, or have they made too many enemies? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to show your support, ring that bell so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and welcome to Patron Week, where I take votes to see what I cover. If you want to be part of the next vote, make sure to check out my Patreon for more details, because if you join at the Nebula Navigator tier or higher before the end of the month, you can choose from Weather Painters, Thunder Dragon, Lunalights, and Dangers. Today, I'll be covering this month's winner, Crystrons. Premiering in the November 2016 core set Invasion Vengeance, this theme was a callback to some of the game's most outlandish synchro summons. The Excel Synchro that required a Tuner Synchro and a non-tuner Synchro monster as material, and the dreaded Double Tuning, which required 2 or more non-tuners and 1 non-tuner as material. In an attempt to reach such lofty heights, Crystrons were pushed as far as they could go, making them one of the premier monster types for synchro summoning, and letting them use material from a variety of places. You could even perform those synchro summons at quick effect speed, bringing them out during your opponent's turn to trigger effects when they least expected it. However, despite their radical design, combined with some truly unfortunate restrictions, this deck never truly got off the ground, becoming so underplayed that it paradoxically produced one of the most feared monsters in the game. But we'll go over that later on. For now, let's do some inventory on all our parts, figure out how to piece together this Crystal Chronicle, then see what aftermarket modifications we can use to cruise down the finish line in style. It's time to clear your mind with Crystrons.
But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and what better way to travel down that road than on your Duel Runner? We'll be covering iconic 5Ds characters along the way, and our next stop is 20k, where we'll start the Yusei Explained series, covering Stardust, Junk, and whatever other cards can help us rev it up! We've also got our Discord, where you can find such rousing topics as cold food discourse, and a Twitter, where you can stay up to date on channel news and my bad takes. And if you really like what I do here, please consider joining my YouTube membership. It's basically like a Twitch sub, emotes included, or backing me on Patreon so you can get your name in the credits, as well as help determine future explained videos that I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video.
So, what's the deal with Crystrons? Well, they're a series of water attribute machine type monsters from the Dracoslayer storyline, specifically during the battle against the True Kings. They have an affinity for synchro summons, and the tuners and non-tuners handle this in different ways, so let's start with those tuners. In fact, we can talk about all three of them rather succinctly, as they all have the same effect with minor, though important, differences. During your opponent's main or battle phase, they can special summon a non-tuner monster from a particular place, but its effects are negated, and if you do, immediately after that effect resolves, you synchro summon a machine type synchro monster, using only that monster and that tuner as material. The level 1 Quan summons from the hand, the level 2 Citri summons from the grave, and the level 3 Rion summons one of your banished monsters. The machine limitation does put a bit of a damper on this effect. Of the 56 machine synchros in the game, only 34 of them have a tuner requirement that doesn't rule out Crystrons, and only 25 have generic non-tuner requirements, though thankfully our on-theme synchros that matter don't have to worry about those restrictions. This unfortunately means we can't drop a Black Rose Dragon on our opponent's turn with this effect, but that doesn't have to be all bad, because two legal targets, Excel and Formula Synchron, can also synchro summon during our opponent's main phase, so if you have the material on board, you can perform another synchro summon, this time without having to worry about summon restrictions. It's a lot of complex stuff, having to make sure the right material is in the right place at the right time to perform the right synchro summon, but hopefully by the end of this video, that'll all be crystal clear. Alright, now it's time for our non-tuners, and all of our level 4 and lower ones also share an effect. They can target a face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do, special summon a Crystron tuner from your deck. But you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn except machine-type synchro monsters. This can help you assemble your synchros, but once again puts you under that machine synchro-only lock. They also all have an effect that can be activated in the grave by banishing themselves, but if you use one effect, you can't use the other that turn. So you can't have a non-tuner pop itself to summon a tuner, and then banish it out of the grave for another effect. Crystron Praseordal is a level 2 monster with 500 attack and 2000 defense, and can be banished from your grave to special summon a Crystron monster from your hand. Not only is this good to set up cards for our non-tuners to destroy for their tuner summoning effect, it's also pretty handy for assembling the cards you need for a synchro summon, whether you need a tuner or a non-tuner, depending on what your hand currently looks like. Though I feel the need to reiterate that you can't normal summon Praseordal, pop itself to summon a tuner out of your deck, then banish themselves right out of the grave for a non-tuner out of your hand to complete the process on that same turn, because why would they make it easy to synchro summon in the synchro archetype? It's pretty helpful when you're in a jam, and also has big Emerald Tortoise energy, so if you ever tire of using Crystrons, you can just pretend you're playing Crystal Beasts. Crystron Smiger is a level 3 monster with 1000 attack and 1800 defense, and can be banished from your grave to add a Crystron spell or trap from your deck to your hand. Now, having a spell and trap searcher is usually a pretty good thing, but in Crystron's case, yeah, not only do we have a very small pool to pick from, they aren't what I'd call the best. Heck, it's also in the same hall of interesting card type inclusions as Necroz of Clausulus, because while Smiger says you can search a spell, a quick search of a Yu-Gi-Oh database will show that there is no Crystron spell, because the Dracoslayer line of archetypes had the bright idea of giving them each a field spell that supported the archetype but wasn't name-stamped as such. Like, do you plan on releasing the Crystron spell anytime soon, Konami? Because I'm not gonna take this fee lying down. Crystron Thistvern is a level 3 monster with 1500 attack and defense, and you can banish them from your grave to add any Crystron monster from your deck to your hand. This one's our best searcher, as it can grab whichever situational effect works best at the time. Whether we need a token, summon a Crystron out of your hand, or put a Crystron into your hand to make that effect live. We do have a whole archetype of crystal monsters, but out of all of them, Thistvern certainly is a real gem. Crystron Rosenix is a level 4 monster with 1800 attack and 1000 defense, and can be banished from the grave to special summon a Crystron token, which is a level 1 water machine monster with 0 attack and defense that can't be tributed. Now, in our theme, this can be used to help bridge the gap when it comes to synchro summoning, giving us that extra level we need to get the numbers in line, or to just add another non-tuner to the mix for any that require 2 or more non-tuners. But in other themes, because this was made before Vrains, it's used as an easy link extender because that second effect doesn't lock you out of any of your plays. By summoning Scrap Recycler, commonly played in Orchest as a way to dump other machines into the grave, you can send Rosenix to the grave and immediately make a token, at which point you can link it off into a Link Spider if you need to turn it into an effect monster, or Link Haribo if your deck has a lot of level 1 synergies. Either way, you can go into Link 2 plays without using any other cards, and without placing any restrictions on you. This means, with a little bit of creativity, anyone can be a duelist of the Rosenix. Next is our last main deck monster, and they play by a few different rules. Crystron Solfefnir is a level 5 monster with 2000 attack and 1500 defense, and if they're in your hand or grave, you can discard a Crystron card, except another copy of Solfefnir, to special summon them, then destroy a card you control. This is actually pretty neat, because while our trap cards' activated effects are kinda lame, their grave effects are top notch. And while destroying your own card is kind of a hassle, especially if you don't have any other cards, so you'd have to destroy Solfefnir, there's still things you can do with it. Because if destroyed by battle or card effect, even your own, you can special summon a Crystron monster from your deck in defense position, so it can be a big monster to help with your synchro summons, or as an enabler for the rest of your theme's effects, pulling your monsters out of your deck and throwing cards in the grave, with every activation getting you Solfefnirer to victory. Alright, now it's time for our synchros. Crystron Quandax is a level 4 synchro tuner monster with 1800 attack and 2000 defense, requiring generic material. Once per turn, during your opponent's main or battle phase, you can, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon a synchro monster using materials including this card you control. Also, if this synchro summoned card is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can target a Crystron monster in your grave except a synchro monster and special summon it. So, on top of Formula and Excel Synchron, we've got another tuner synchro we can use to wreak havoc on our opponent's turn. And if our opponent tries to blow it up before you can make good use of it, you can just replace it with another Crystron to help with our combos later. Which is such a nice effect, you might forget that Quan basically crawled inside of Smyger and made them their mech suit. Crystron Amatrix is a level 5 synchro monster with 2500 attack and 1500 defense, requiring generic material. If synchro summoned, you can change all face-up special summoned monsters your opponent controls to defense position. And much like Quandax, if destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target a non-synchro Crystron monster in your grave and special summon it. The effect seems pretty lackluster when used on your turn, but can actually mean the difference between winning and losing when used on your opponent's turn, as you can blank a lot of attacks by quick synchroing into Amatrix during your opponent's battle phase. Sure, Link monsters aren't going to care one way or the other, but in any other case, they're a pretty spicy combat Amatrix. Now it's time for our bosses, and the first up to bat is Crystron Phoenix. They're a level 9 synchro monster with 2800 attack and 2000 defense, requiring a tuner synchro monster and one or more non-tuner synchro monsters as material. If synchro summoned, you can banish all spell and trap cards your opponent controls and is in their grave, so if they're planning on using them for anything, they're gonna have to act fast. And if this synchro summoned card is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can target any other monster in your grave and special summon it, regardless if it's a synchro or not. Heck, it's regardless if it's a Crystron or not. Now, unfortunately, this otherwise isn't going to impact the board much. As it turns out, removing back row isn't exactly a winning strategy, and they're competing in the same space as something like Stardust Warrior, which can negate special summons and replaces themselves with a new synchro monster right out of the extra as a synchro summon. Like, sure, Altergeist are gonna feel the burn, but that phrase doesn't even make sense here because this is a water theme. Our last synchro is Crystron Quarian Gandrix, a level 9 synchro monster with 3000 attack and defense, and they're the double tuning to Phoenix's Excel Synchro, requiring 2 or more tuners and 1 non-tuner monster as material. If synchro summoned, you can target monsters your opponent controls and or in their grave, up to the number of synchro material used for this card's synchro summon, and banish them. And if the synchro summoned card is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can target a banished monster except this copy of Quarian Gandrix, and special summon it to your field. Now that's some removal. especially if done during your opponent's turn. While it doesn't require a synchro tuner, their quick synchro effects do help in using Corian Gandrix as a way to throw a wrench in your opponent's plans, stripping them of on-field monsters integral to building their board, or getting recursive or otherwise useful monsters out of their grave. And then, if your opponent destroys Corian Gandrix, you can take one of those monsters you banished as your own. Or if you've got any of your own banished monsters you'd like to play again, you can revive those as well. Either way, you benefit from Corian Gandrix's destruction, which means if your opponent has the opportunity to do so, they'll be in for a bit of a Crystron quandary. But here's the big one. The one that's overshadowed every Crystron card, arguably every synchro-related card ever printed, as any deck that uses the mechanic has to imagine how this card plays into their strategy. It's been part of game-breaking combos, and has avoided being relegated to the ban list by throwing countless other tuners away to replace it. I am, of course, referring to the one, the only, Crystron Halqifibrax. It's so controversial, in fact, that even invoking its name causes ripples to echo across the player base, as many prefer the name it went by before an official translation, Crystron Needlefiber. It's a Link 2 monster with 1500 attack, requiring any 2 monsters, including at least 1 tuner. If Link summoned, you can special summon a level 3 or lower tuner from your hand or deck in defense position, but it can't activate its effects this turn, which isn't a hindrance to our tuners because they only activate during our opponent's turn. And during your opponent's main or battle phase, as a quick effect, you can banish this card you control to special summon a tuner synchro monster from your extra deck, which counts as a synchro summon. Everything about this card is a total blowout. With no restrictions in place for what you can do after it's summoned, you can use the tuner you summoned to make a Link 3, and while they were all legal, people would play the tuners with the best possible grave effects, replacing themselves so you can climb the Link and synchro ladder even more. And that's why you can't play cards like Mecha Phantom Beast Online and Jet Synchron anymore. You can't even make Jet Warrior anymore without resorting to monsters that count as Jet Synchron like Junk Anchor and Righty Driver. And none of that gets into what shenanigans you can do with its other effect. You can summon Shooting Riser Dragon, bidding a card to use on your next turn while setting up for another quick synchro, since it's a tuner with a modular level, fitting basically any playing field. Formula Synchron can draw you a card while setting up for that synchro summon, and Desert Locust can rip a card out of your opponent's hand while also setting up a quick synchro. And normally, I'd also be mad at another monster meant for one archetype that's been exploited by the metagame at large, but in this scenario, I actually don't have much ground to stand on. Because of the restriction we can all too easily find ourselves under thanks to our non-tuners, we wouldn't even be able to make Halqifibrax. Unless we assemble the necessary materials with Solfefnir and a well-timed Prasiortal, you won't be able to thread the needle on this play sequence. Okay, now it's time for our spells and traps. First up is our field spell, which once again isn't name-stamped, Crystallic Potential. It gives all your Crystrons a 300 attack and defense boost, and once per turn during the end phase, you can draw cards equal to the number of Crystron Synchro monsters you Synchro summon this turn. That makes it something of a delayed Hyper Librarian, another stellar card in the theme, were it not for our machine focus. Though thankfully, you can play Potential after doing a swath of synchro summons and still get the benefit. It even triggers during both players' end phases, so you can do your quick synchro shenanigans and still get the benefit. But only when it comes to those Crystron synchros. And when it comes to synchros in general, you simply can't wait until the end phase to get the card draw. Hyper Librarian is so good because it gives you the draw immediately, helping you to extend your plays while they happen so you can raise your ceiling. Potential, by contrast, doesn't really raise your ceiling so much as give you the ability to do it again next turn, if it isn't removed from the field by your opponent. It has some really nice upside, but because of card text that's focused too much on preventing another synchro spam strategy, it just doesn't live up to its full potential. Crystron Entry is a normal trap that special summons 2 Crystron tuners, one from your hand and one from your grave. Also, during either player's turn, except the turn Entry was sent to the grave, you can banish it from your grave, then target a Crystron monster you control, and send another Crystron from your deck to the grave, whose level is different from the targeted monster. And if you do, that targeted monster's level becomes that of the monster sent to the grave. In a more flexible situation, I'd call Entry's first effect good. After all, getting 2 tuners that can quick synchro is a great way to get Phoenix online. But because they have to come from 2 very restrictive pools, it's gonna take a lot of work to line the levels up in a way that makes it work. The grave effect is a bit more my speed. Not only does it provide good modulation, you can set up your non-tuner grave effects, though it is a huge pain that you can't use it on the turn it hits the grave. But hey, I guess that's just the price of Entry. Crystron Impact is another normal trap that targets one of your banished Crystrons and special summons it, and if you do, if your opponent controls any face-up monsters, change their defense to 0 permanently. Which I guess is supposed to combo with Amatrix's Mass Stop Attack effect. And during either player's turn, except the turn Impact is sent to the grave, when a card or effect is activated that targets a Crystron monster you control, you can banish Impact from your grave to negate that effect. So, hey, at least we have some kind of targeting protection to keep our plays safe. And summoning a banished Crystron isn't bad per se, as it recycles a card that can get us back into the Synchro game, but if I'm being honest, I don't think it does enough to really have an impact. Okay, so that's all the Crystron cards, but what do we do with them? Well, that's a pretty tough question because we don't really have a strong win condition. Sure, Quarian Gandrix is some powerful removal, but doesn't really have a plan to close out the game as a follow-up. We're gonna need to lean very heavily into other strategies for some cards we can use to get us over the finish line. But what can we play to help them out? Crystallic Potential is a pretty big letdown, but as long as we've got an unsearchable field spell, we might want to branch out into something like Starlight Junction. Its first effect is pretty helpful if we plan to run a bit of a Synchron package, which might be nice considering Quick Draw is a pretty good discard outlet, but its main usage is as removal. Even just using our main deck tuner's effects can trigger it, and that means we don't even have to summon anything super impactful to spin one of our opponent's cards back into the deck. In fact, Yusei's kind of a treasure trove when it comes to cards that work with Crystron. For instance, if you can get Crystron Phoenix online, Scrap Iron Signal is just a repeatable Divine Wrath at no cost. If you have Quandax, Amatrix, and a Crystron token, you can quick synchro that token and a Quandax into Excel Synchron before using it and Amatrix to make Satellite Warrior. That's at least 3 synchros in grave, giving you a swift 3-card pop on top of a 5500 attack Bruiser. Lean more into the Yusei theming, and it even floats into a bunch of your other synchros when your opponent gets it off the field. Even Junk Converter can get our combos going. Ditch it and any Crystron tuner into Junk Synchron, normal summon them to get back the Converter, then make Excel Synchron. At that point, Converter can summon back Junk Synchron, and now you have 8 levels worth of tuners. Depending on what non-tuners you have on board, you can send another Synchron from your deck to the grave to modulate Excel, then you can quick synchro into Quarian Gandrix at any time for removal, or summon Tyrant Red Dragon Archfiend to wipe the board. As for a silly tech pick, well, I can't think of a deck that's in more need of a win condition that can be constructed in the most convoluted of ways than Red Supernova Dragon. Ideally, we'll have the ability to have Quandax and Amatrix on board, which is already 9 levels, a non-tuner synchro, and a tuner. If we can also put on board Quan and Citri, 2 more tuners that have a total of 3 levels between them, maybe using something like Crystron Entry, and we've got all the material we need. When you're ready, just pull the trigger, and you'll have what will be, at minimum, a 5500 attack body that can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. And the second your opponent activates a monster effect, you can banish every card your opponent controls. And the best part is, while it must first be synchro summoned, it can be revived once it's done so, meaning if you later get your Phoenix destroyed, the fire that comes back is going to be a little hotter than your opponent expected. And that's all I've got to say about Crystrons. They're a very gimmicky deck that lacks the cards needed to make a splash in the metagame, being even unable to effectively use a card of its own theme that warped the metagame around it. However, if you miss the old days of synchro summoning, when the sky felt like the limit in regards to combos, this deck is an easy way to get a quick fix, as long as you and the deck are in sync. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Do you agree that Crystron are going to need a major overhaul before it makes its way past table 500, or do you believe I haven't fully comprehended this deck's many facets? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video around. It really does a lot to help me out. And if you want to help fund my quest to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, I'd be so grateful if you could check out my YouTube membership and Patreon links in the description to see if I have anything you'd like on offer. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and it's time to fulfill a request from this month's Quasar Commander. That's right, the patron that goes the most above and beyond gets their choice of archetype to cover, and this time around, we're continuing coverage of the Dracoslayer storyline by talking about the last companion theme found in the True King half of the story. We've cracked Crystrons and melded with Metalfoes, and now it's time to get zany with Zoodiacs. Premiering in the February 2017 core set Raging Tempest, the penultimate set before the end of Arc V, this crew of furry freedom fighters were the third to obtain the blessings of Masterpiece the True Dracoslayer, helping them in their battle against True King Lithosygem, the closest of VFD's spawn to match its power. I don't have any lore reason to back that up, but it has been the only other True King to end up on the ban list, so there's that. While the Zoodiac's gauntlets don't match their size, they do match their power level, acting as a menace to the competitive landscape while at the height of their power. Even during the first run of Master Rule 4, when summoning from the extra deck was highly restricted, their gimmick shielded them from the change's more destructive repercussions, and it took many hits on the ban list and a huge swell in power creep to put this deck in check. And today, we're going to cover just what made them so terrifying. Let's check our dates to see all the animals the Zoodiacs have to offer, see how they stack up, then find some beasts to help them with the burden of victory. It's time to zoom past the competition with Zoodiacs. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and there's no better way to get there than on our duel runners. Our next stop is 40k, which means Leo and Luna Explained, where we'll be covering Ancient Fairy Dragon's companions, the Power Tool Dragons, Morphtronics, and any other cards that are more than meets the eye. We've also got a Discord where we have no shortage of cute sneckies. I also have a Twitch where you can join me for viewer duels, progression polls pulls, and chaos draft pulls for the foreseeable future. And don't forget about my Patreon, where you can gain access to my videos early, reach some of these milestones, as well as helping to determine which videos I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So what's the deal with Zoodiacs? Well, they're a series of level, or rank 4, Earth Attribute Beast Warrior type monsters, and while their central gimmick isn't new, it does push the mechanic to its extreme. Chaos Xyz Evolution. While not an officially recognized term, you'll remember from my Utopia video that some Xyz monsters can be slapped right on top of another one without using a rank-up magic spell or similar effect. The classic example is that number C39 Utopia Ray can be slapped onto an existing Utopia, but you also have things like Downward Magician for any rank 3 or lower Xyz monster during main phase 2, and one of the most prevalent extra deck monsters at time of recording, Zeus, can Chaos Xyz on top of any Xyz the turn any Xyz monster has battled. But those are all still relegated to very specific situations with very little follow-up. Once you make Zeus, that's basically the end of the line, you just have Zeus. Zoodiacs take this one step beyond. All of their Xyz monsters can be stacked on top of a single Zoodiac monster, other than a copy of itself. And with no less than 6 Xyz monsters, you can end up cycling through a ton of effects off a single monster. Kind of like how a single Sky Striker Ray can be every Sky Striker mecha on the planet. We'll get more into how they function in just a bit, but for now, we're going to want to talk about the main deck monsters that make up the starting point for our deck. And something to keep in mind is that, while they're Xyz material, they grant the monster they're attached to an effect, as long as their original type is Beast Warrior. That means they'll be applying their effects to any Zoodiac Xyz they're a part of, as well as any off-theme monsters you might run, like Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Tiger King. Also note that this gives the material while being an Xyz material, instead of giving an effect to a monster that uses it as Xyz material. So no matter how they end up as material, their effects will still apply. You could stack 4 Xyz on top of a single monster, and you'll still pass on that original bonus effect. Zoodiac Bunny Blast has 800 attack and defense, and if this card is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can target a Zoodiac card in your grave, except a copy of itself, and add it to your hand. And as an Xyz material to a Beast Warrior Xyz monster, during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a spell card or effect that targets this card, you can attach a material from this card to negate the activation. This will unfortunately not help against the likes of Forbidden Droplets, but most other spells you can just shrug right off. You know, your Chalices, your enemy controllers, your Change of Hearts, all that kind of stuff. And it's all wrapped up in such a cute little package. It's good to see that, in a game full of bloodthirsty fiends and corrupted machines, that we can keep some innocence and wonder alive. Zoodiac Cataroost has 800 attack and 1200 defense, and if this card is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can target a Zoodiac card in your grave and shuffle it into the deck. And as an Xyz material for a Beast Warrior Xyz monster during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect that targets this card, you can detach a material from this card to negate the activation. So where Bunny Blast kept you safe against spells, Cataroost does the same thing against Effect Veiler or Eldritch. And since monsters tend to be the most represented among interactions, this card is certainly the cock of the walk. Zoodiac Ram has 400 attack and 2000 defense, and if this card is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can target a Zoodiac monster in your grave and special summon it. And while this is Xyz material for a Beast Warrior monster, when your opponent activates a trap card or effect that targets this card as a quick effect, you can detach a material to negate the activation. Ram is probably our best of these three when it comes to being an actual monster, having the best defense and actually replacing itself on destruction with an actual summon. But the effect is a bit less useful. It'll keep you safe from the Errant Imperm and other niche picks, but really, its floating effect was all it needed, especially during Master Rule 4 where you could revive Xyz material out of your grave with this, thus putting it in the main monster zone, then use other effects to give it Xyz material, bypassing the EMZ restriction. It's a trick that's still useful nowadays to broaden your lineup and make it easier to field things like Utopic Draco Future. In fact, there's a whole stable of plays you can pull off with this. Just look up Ram Ranch for more details. Zoodiac Rat Pierre has 0 attack and defense, and if this card is normal summoned, you can send a Zoodiac card from your deck to the grave. And while it's Xyz material to a Beast Warrior Xyz monster, it can once per turn detach a material to special summon a Zoodiac Rat Pierre from your hand or deck. Now, if you don't know anything about Zoodiacs, I want you to pause the video right now and comment down below where you think Rat Pierre is on the ban list right now. Unlimited? Semied? Limited? Banned? Go ahead. Take a moment, I want to see what your first impressions are of this card's power level. At time of recording, this card is limited. That's right, the one spot on the list that keeps it legal while completely shutting off the granted effect. And if you think about it for a bit, you can start to see why. In a deck where a single monster unlocks your entire extra deck, it might be a little strong to gain access to a whole free material that can make another big Xyz stack, or help you access your generic rank 4 toolbox. After all, despite everything else, we are still an archetype made up entirely of level 4 monsters, meaning we have even more options. Zoodiac Thoroughblade has 1600 attack and 0 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can discard a Zoodiac card to draw a card. And as Xyz material on a Beast Warrior Xyz, it grants that monster piercing battle damage. This makes for a great way to cycle cards out of your hand, so you get just the right ones you need for the game plan ahead. And considering how powerful some of our cards can be, trust me, they're worth digging for. As it turns out, it's always worth it to take a thorough look through your deck. Zoodiac Whiptail has 1200 attack and 400 defense, and as a quick effect, you can target a Beast Warrior Xyz monster you control and attach this card from your hand or field to it as material. And while it isn't Xyz material to a Beast Warrior Xyz monster, if it battles an opponent's monster after damage calculation, banish that opponent's monster. This is one of the trickiest in the theme, as it effectively acts as a battle hand trap. Not only will you be able to attack with this during the battle phase and then quick effect slide it under one of your Zoodiacs, and spoilers, this will grant it an additional 1200 attack, your opponent might think it's safe to attack into one of your Xyz when all of a sudden Whiptail descends from your hand and turns it into a deity warrior lady, and, if nothing else, can still just act as extra material for your effects. Either way, your opponent's gonna end up with the tail end of the deal. Alright, that's all of our main deck monsters, and now it's time for our Xyz, and there's actually another nifty quirk they all share. On top of being able to stack on top of a differently named Zoodiac once per turn, they all have question mark attack and defense, and they derive those stats from the combined total attack and defense of all Zoodiac monsters it has as material. This provides a very interesting trade-off. You can either make them the quick and easy way, but not have very good stats because at most you'll have a single main deck monster to work with, or summon them the hard way and get some decent stats out of it. Though, as history has borne out, the quick and easy way is usually the best. Let's start with Zoodiac Broadbull, who requires 2 level 4 monsters as material, and once per turn you can detach an Xyz material from this card to add a Beast Warrior monster from your deck to your hand that can be normal summoned or set. This excludes, like, 7 monsters. Other than that, every Beast Warrior in the game in your main deck is at your disposal. And this card wasn't just good in Zoodiacs, I mean, they're all Beast Warriors, so go figure. It was also good for any deck that could use level 4 monsters and had Beast Warriors you wanted to search, because the material requirements for this card are so lax. This opened things up so a bunch of non-Zoodiac decks could play a bunch of Zoodiac Xyz, because Broad Bull was a great onboarding ramp to access the rest. And if you wanted to be extra nutty by using that same technique, you could get 2 Broad Bull searches in the same turn. One for making it the hard way, and the second for making it the easy way after you cycled through a different Zoodiac, because that search is a soft once per turn. So, unsurprisingly, this card was banned and remains so to this day. Because any card that's basically a non-level restricted tanky that could potentially be used twice has far too broad of an appeal. Zoodiac Chalkanine requires 2 or more level 4 monsters as material, and once per turn you can detach an Xyz material from this card, then target a Zoodiac monster in your grave, special summon it, but for the rest of the turn it has its effects negated, and also it can't be used as Xyz material for a summon. That sounds really counterintuitive, but it's actually really good for setting up your non-Xyz Zoodiacs, namely Ram, as it has great defense, and its on-destruction effect will still trigger despite Chalkanine's negation. So if it gets popped by either you or your opponent, you get a fresh Zoodiac, and it's not going to have any of Chalkanine's restrictions. Basically, they tried to put a tight leash on its effectiveness, but there were ways around it. Zoodiac Tiger Mortar requires 3 level 4 monsters as material, and once per turn you can detach an Xyz material from this card, then target an Xyz monster you control and a Zoodiac monster in your grave, and attach that Zoodiac monster to that Xyz monster as material. This basically means you get to transfer a material from Tiger Mortar to another Xyz, though you can also use it to swap Tiger Mortar's material since it can target itself. And more likely than not, this is used to recharge the effects of any Zoodiac you revive from the grave to give it a second lease on life. A prime example being that you can summon back an Xyz with Chalkanine, ranking that Chalkanine into Tiger Mortar, then giving that new monster a material to use next turn. And you get to pick which material is best, giving them the targeted negation effects of Cataroost, Bunny Blast, or Ram to push their effects through. I also like how they have a penchant for flower arranging, though to be fair, that last bit of info isn't exactly canon. Zoodiac Hammer Kong requires 3 or more level 4 monsters as material, and while this card has Xyz material, your opponent can't target face-up Zoodiac monsters on the field with card effects, except this one. And once per turn, during the end phase, detach an Xyz material from this card. This provides some great protection for your monster lineup, and as it turns out, is fairly easy to use. Simply rank up into this, then use it as part of your Xyz step ladder, detach this for an effect, then use Chalkanine to revive it. Then you can use that trick to rank Chalkanine into Tiger Mortar to give Hammer Kong a material. Now, because its effects are negated thanks to Chalkanine, it won't provide its protection yet, but it also means it can't detach a material at the end phase. So once things roll around and the effect negation goes away, your opponent can only interact with your monsters in limited ways. Unfortunately, the detach happens on both players' end phases, so you will lose the protection once you go back around to your turn. But another Tiger Mortar effect will fix that right up. What can I say? This card is just another in a long conga line of assholes. Zoodiac Trident requires 4 level 4 monsters as material, and once per turn during either player's turn, you can detach a material from this card, then target a face-up card on the field and destroy it. That's right, the one and only Trident has made their appearance. While the effect seems pretty tame, I mean it's marginally better than a Raigeki break really, it doesn't even hit face down cards. But Trident terrorized the meta for a long time to come, as quick and easy removal at spell speed 2 was downright oppressive. Heck, if you had the spare material, you could spend 1 to blow up your own Ram to continue your plays. That's how versatile this card was. And to this day, that power has been iterated upon and continues to get even stronger. I've been known to call Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer a grape-flavored Trident, but really, where's the lie? Sure, it doesn't target and can hit face-down cards now, along with a bunch of ancillary changes, but really, it's just an example of the next step of Trident's influence permeating throughout the metagame, and is, maybe inappropriately, banned as well. Seriously, that's 3 cards in Zoodiacs that are F&L list adjacent. The designers really forked up with this archetype. Zoodiac Borbo requires 5 level 4 monsters as material and can attack directly. And if this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent while it has 12 or more Xyz material, you can send as many cards as possible from your opponent's hand and field to the grave, then change this card to defense position. It feels like this should be the deck's big win condition. Stack up a monster with an ungodly amount of material, swing in, then strip your opponent of all their resources. In reality, it was used as a spare Zoodiac to get some free material that could sometimes swing in for some chip damage. Until now, where its ability to attack uncontested, and thus battle, makes this one of the most potent enablers for Divine Arsenal AA Zeus, Sky Thunder. Attack directly with Borbo, stack a ton of material onto it, and you can easily get a Zeus with 3 activations, meaning you'll be able to commit a lot of board wipes. It does suck that such a cool effect has been pushed to the side for what amounts to the access code talker of Xyz monsters, but it gets the job done, even if it is a little boring. Alright, that's all the monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps, and this one is another reason why the deck was so feared. Zoodiac Barrage is— what in the heck is going on with Bunny Blast? Anyway, Zoodiac Barrage is a continuous spell that targets a face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do, special summon a Zoodiac monster from your deck. And if this card is destroyed by a card effect and sent to the grave, you can target a Zoodiac Xyz monster you control and attach this card from your grave to that Xyz monster as Xyz material. So, to clarify, this was effectively an emergency teleport for all your Zoodiacs, getting them onto the field without using your normal summon. And since it could target and destroy itself, it didn't require any prior setup. It could also destroy things like floodgates or even your own Zoodiacs because, once again, Ram exists. It's like a Metalfoes card, but 100 times better. And if you already had a Zoodiac Xyz on board, then you can slide this under a monster as spare material to make more use of their effects. This also made it so you could easily splash Zoodiac into other decks without interfering with the base deck's engine, providing easy access to a variety of extra deck effects, including Trident. And so, like a lot of cards we've talked about today, this card is also banned. It's a veritable barrage of botched ban list bungles. Zoodiac Sign is the obligatory lore field spell. It grants all Zoodiac monsters a 300 attack and defense boost, and monsters your opponent controls can't target face-up Beast Warrior type monsters you control for attacks, except the one with the highest attack, either if tied. And once per turn, if any number of Zoodiac monsters you control are destroyed by a card effect, you can destroy a monster in your hand or field instead of one of your Zoodiac monsters. As far as these field spells go, this is actually decent. Not good, but decent. It means you can stack some good attacks on a single Zoodiac to draw fire away from your others that are lacking stats so they don't get run over. And being able to destroy Cataroost, Bunny Blast, or Ram to protect your other Zoodiacs means you get protection and a floating effect. It's still not name-stamped as a Zoodiac card, it's missing that crucial second O, but hey, baby steps. It also shows that Masterpiece is the one that got them those gauntlets, so now we know who's responsible for taking Hammer Kong's measurements and then just making a bunch of hammers in that size for everyone. We have got to find someone to tailor those things. Zoodiac Combo is a normal trap card that targets a Zoodiac Xyz monster you control, and you attach a Zoodiac monster from your deck to that Xyz monster as material. And during either player's turn, except the turn this card was sent to the grave, you can banish this card from your grave, then target 5 Zoodiac cards in your grave with different names, shuffle all 5 into the deck, then draw a card. This was a phenomenal card for keeping your resources stocked up, and was a guaranteed one of in any build that ran a lot of these cards. You can easily send it off the normal summon of Rat Pierre, and after you've cycled through a lot of Xyz monsters, you can shove them all back into the extra deck to use later, and get you a draw for your troubles. And its on-field effect wasn't half bad either, giving you more material and extra effects. Whiptail was already silly enough, but now you could do it right from the deck. What a neat combo. Zoodiac Gathering is a continuous trap card, and if a Zoodiac Xyz monster you control would detach its material to activate an effect, you can detach an Xyz material from another Xyz monster you control instead. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target 2 Zoodiac Xyz monsters you control, and attach one of those monsters to the other as Xyz material. Now, it doesn't transfer all the material one has to another, so you're mostly better off attaching an empty Xyz to one with material, or choosing 2 Xyz with no material. The first effect to essentially share material is also pretty nice, but hasn't really been a concern that needs fixing. So this card hasn't really seen much play, ever. Honestly, I'm kinda just wondering what the argument is about. Is Chalk and Iron upset that Cataroost didn't wake them up on time, so they were all late? I mean, they did show up in the second wave of Zoodiac support after all. But I like to think it was because they were playing another game where gathering is a big deal. And if there's anything Konami wants from its characters, it's brand loyalty. Alright, so that's all the Zoodiac cards, but what do we do with them? Well, the deck doesn't really have its own concise win condition. We have a lot of utility effects and great resource management, but closing out the game? Yeah, that's not happening. So we'll want to rely on other themes to do the heavy lifting for us, while the Zoodiac part plays support. So what can we play to help them out? Well, a support card you definitely want to keep in mind is Fire Formation Tenki. Currently semi-limited, though this time because of a different tri-type focused archetype, it searches any member of our cast and gives them all a much needed, if small, attack boost. You might also want to consider Tensu for the extra normal summon, which will help you with your generic rank 4 plays while giving your Xyz monsters a bit more heft. Broad Bull may be gone, but Chalk-and-Iron is still a good onboarding point if you want some beefier Xyz. This also means you should keep Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Tiger King in mind to search more Fire Formation cards and give you some more broad negation. And while Tri-Brigade is fresh on our minds, yeah, that's a great theme to cross over with this. All the spare Zoodiacs we throw in the grave make great fodder for grave linking, and you get even more removal options with Shrag. And if you're worried about banishing all your Zoos, just activate Revolt to get them all back. I've mentioned Utopic Draco Future previously, but it bears repeating, this card is nutty. Any 2 Zoodiac Xyz make the base Utopic Future, which then ranks up into the big body that pushes for damage while providing monster effect negation. Alpha, the Master of Beasts, is a superb option to help with breaking boards. You can easily slam it onto the field, especially considering how low the attack of our Zoodiacs are likely to be, then bounce any number of them, even itself, to clear out threats while once again being a big body that can help you push for game if that effect isn't needed. Infinitrack Fortress Megaclops is sometimes floated as a potential boss monster for the theme, being unaffected by all monsters save for Xyz, which would be really good protection if almost every deck didn't have a way to contest this with Zeus. However, if we look at what it can do, rather than what it might prevent, we see a monster that can take spent Zoo Xyz monsters, turn them into removal while giving them more material, and now they have a fresh spring in their step, so it might be worth to keep one on hand just in case. As for a silly tech pick, how about Xyz Gift? If you're going to fold some of these monsters into Utopic Future anyway and lose all their material, you might as well get some draws out of it. And that's all I have to say about Zoodiac. Their full potential will never be unleashed until some of their more powerful members are let off the list, but honestly, I'm okay with keeping it the way it is. While monsters like Drident, I believe, are on the same level as the current meta, Broad Bull can never come back, and I'm pretty iffy on Barrage. However, as a little side engine in other decks, it shines for its ability to stay flexible while gaining you a lot of advantage. Or to just Zeus your opponent. Seriously, at this point, I'm just about to count Zeus as an honorary Zoodiac. Zeusiac. Zoodeus? But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Zoodiacs Zoopendous, or is this just not their year? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to show your support, ring that bell so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and it's time to round out Patron Week with this month's Quasar Commander's request, and I'm starting to sense a bit of a theme here. They've asked for Metalfoes, they've petitioned for Zoodiacs, and with no more themes left in the second stage of the Dracoslayer storyline, it's time to cover what has to be one of the most controversial themes printed at the end of the Arc V and beginning of Reign's era: True Kings and True Dracos. While the True Kings slowly made their way into the card pool since the Dark Illusion, arriving as destructive foils to that pack's lore archetype, the True Dracos made their appearance known in the final pack of Arc V, premiering in May 2017, Maximum Crisis. Though, strangely enough, they're the same archetype in the OCG, the True Dragons, though the big ones are called True Dragon Kings, so there is kind of a difference, though that would be like having the Subterra Behemoths and the Subterra Nemesis monsters be different themes, with all the support working for both, so it's still a huge pain. Fans of my Dracoslayer storyline series will know that these two archetypes are diametrically opposed, each serving one of the lingering forms of luster or vector pendulum left behind after their spirits had combined. But despite their differences, their support works for both themes. So for today, I'm forcing Mariamne and Calamity to wear the Get Along t-shirt for as long as it takes to account for all our Drake comrades, see how each group Drake conducts themselves, then find any accomplices that can take their themes Drake overboard. It's time to get to the truth of the matter with True Kings and True Dracos. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what I do. Once we get to 40k, we're doing our next 5Ds video on Leo and Luna, and every sub helps. Also, check out my Discord, where I have inadvertently incurred the wrath of the Altergeist community. I guess that's one of those Yugi-tubing rites of passages, huh? And my Twitch, where you can watch me put all my lessons to the test live with viewer duels. And if you want to go that extra mile, join my Patreon where you can get my videos early and help us reach these video milestones. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, what's the deal with the True Kings and True Dracos? Well, they're pretty different, so we'll start by covering the True Kings. After all, what's a hero without a good villain? That's a pretty complicated narrative question, but for this material, it's a sentiment that's never rang more true. All of them are level 9 worm monsters, and they each share two characteristics. One, while in the hand, you can destroy two other monsters in your hand and or face up on your field, including a monster of that True King's attribute, and if you do, special summon that True King from your hand. The effect also does a little something extra if you destroy two monsters of the same attribute. Two, they also have a floating effect that triggers when destroyed by a card effect from anywhere involving a worm monster of a different attribute in some way. For instance, one will summon from the grave, one will search from the deck, that kind of stuff. This lends themselves towards working in two different configurations, either being played in a mono-attribute archetype that matches theirs, or in a True King deck, using their summoning effects to pop their siblings to trigger their effects when destroyed by a card effect. Though the problem with that last option is that the True Kings don't have any overlapping attributes. Each one is the sole member of its element, so to fit their summoning requirements, you'll have to either draw multiples of the same one, or include a variety of non-True King monsters of different attributes as connective tissue. Once again, ones that love being exploded. First up is True King Igknight the Vanisher, a fire monster with 2900 attack and 1900 defense, and if you destroyed two fire monsters for this card's summon, you can banish a monster from your opponent's field or grave. And if this card is destroyed by a card effect, you can add a non-fire worm monster from your grave to your hand. The recursion is nice. Being able to buy back resources in a deck that keeps breaking their own seems like a no-brainer, and its removal effect is stellar. A non-targeting banish that can not only deal with problem monsters on the board, but potential ragamuffins in the grave is pretty flexible. Not to mention it's got a pretty decent attack stat for the work you have to put into it. Pair this with Metalfoes so you can just pendulum summon back the monsters you destroy, or Fire Kings as an absurd enabler, and your opponent's options are just gonna vanish. True King Barastos the Fathomer is a water monster with 1800 attack and 3000 defense, and if you destroy two water monsters for this card's summon, you can banish up to two Speller Trap cards from your opponent's field and or grave. And if this card is destroyed by a card effect, you can special summon a non-water worm type monster from your deck in defense position. This is pretty similar to Igknight, but you get to hit two cards, though how useful spell and trap removal is going to be on a monster body is going to be largely dependent on the format. Hopefully one that doesn't have mine in it. But its on destruction effect is a pretty strong starter. Blow this up and you get any worm that's not a water. This unfortunately means you can't toss out Moye, but Taya does fit the bill. Heck, Barastos is even fodder for the token summoning. It also might find a home in Dinomist, who once again have the ability to pendulum summon themselves back when destroyed, and could potentially use the back row removal. The deck is good at fighting, not so good at dealing with floodgates. But do not try to mix this with Atlanteans, as their effects trigger when sent to the grave to activate a water monster's effect, but the destruction isn't cost, it's just the effect. That might seem pretty strange since you have to destroy the monsters to get the summon to go through, but it's one of those weird nuances you're gonna have to fathom in advanced play. True King Lithosogem, the Disaster, is an Earth monster with 2500 attack and 2300 defense, and if you destroy 2 Earth monsters for its summon, you can look at your opponent's extra deck and banish up to 3 monsters with different names from it. And if this card is destroyed by a card effect, you can special summon a non-Earth worm monster from your grave. Reviving monsters is, of course, a very useful effect, but good gravy is their on-summon ability ridiculous. Gaining perfect access about what's in your opponent's extra deck, maybe even before they get a chance to play anything, is already a great way to learn what your opponent might be up to. But also banishing 3 cards out of it? That knocks out 3 of any monster that doesn't have a duplicate to take its place, making this card the bane of the utility one of. Think of stuff like Nightmare Phoenix, Cerberus, and Unicorn. It also has one of the most explosive companion themes out of the whole lineup, and that's including the literal fire one, dinosaurs! While they do run the gamut of attributes, Lithosogem cracks Baby Ceratosaurus and Petite Pteranodon for a ton of value, which was, I feel like I have to remind you, on top of just getting to siphon off a 5th of your opponent's extra deck. In fact, it's still on the limited list to this day, and I hope it stays that way because any more copies would result in disastrous consequences. Mariamne is technically the true Draco Phoenix, but it operates like a true king, so we're just going to talk about them here. They're a wind monster with 2700 attack and 2100 defense, and if you destroyed 2 wind monsters to summon this, you can banish exactly 4 cards from the top of your opponent's deck. And if this card is destroyed by a card effect, you can add a non-wind worm monster from your deck to your hand. This is the most underwhelming of the team because not only can I count the number of good wind archetypes on one hand, to say nothing of the ones that want their stuff destroyed, its effect is a one-sided but worse necrophase. Maybe if you know what's on top of your opponent's deck, this is a way to keep them from getting to it, but blowing up Spiral Gear Drone doesn't seem like the most practical use of your time. The name is mismatched, the effect is out of place, so maybe not every Phoenix rises from the ashes as gracefully as it was before. But the big payoff is the Xyz that's terrified format after format, and has only just recently had its claws wrested from Master Duel, the true king of all calamities. A rank 9 Dark Xyz monster with 3000 attack and defense, requiring 2 or more level 9 monsters as material. Once per turn, as a quick effect, you can detach a material from this card and declare an attribute. That turn, all face-up monsters on the field become that attribute. Also, all monsters in your opponent's possession with that attribute can't activate their effects or attack. And monsters that True Draco and True King monsters in your hand would destroy with their effects can be chosen from your opponent's field. Now that last effect is a pretty cool enabler. It makes your opponent's field fodder for your True Kings, making their summons basically free while helping to break a board, while ensuring they get their full effect. The problem was, everything else. See, the lockdown effect is strong, but balanced by how hard it is to make level 9 monsters. Basically, True Kings had a stranglehold on that market, and since they didn't see much play, Calamities wasn't much of an issue. At the time! See, because this card is generic, it lined up very well with the next time the designers decided to explore the level 9 space. Virtual Worlds. Now, at the drop of a hat, you could summon a monster that floodgated everything your opponent put onto the field, basically skipped your opponent's battle phase, and if they were on a mono attribute deck, you could freeze all of their effects if you knew what they were on, because while it only changes the attributes of monsters on the field, it checks all cards in your opponent's possession for the effect lock. That means hand, grave, banished zone, everywhere. And as more and more decks started to access the level 9 synchro pool with more and more generic and powerful level 9 synchros to use as material, the more and more this card became hated by the community. And as of now, it's been banned from every official way to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, including the OCG. Not even Mystic Mind and Max C have found a way to do that. They even had to kill it in the story just to make sure they weren't tempted to bring it back. But this is what happens every time the designers tempt fate. A broken effect almost no one can use is a broken effect that's going to cause massive problems down the line. They really are all just calamities waiting to happen. Alright, that's all the kings, now it's time for the Dracos. Like our previous subjects, all these monsters are worms, though their levels are a bit more varied. And when tribute summoning for these cards, you can tribute continuous spell and trap cards in place of monsters if you so choose, with the majority of their effects only available if they were tribute summoned. The focus is to punish your opponent for doing, well, anything, by gaining U card advantage, all while being very difficult to interact with. Oh, and a quick aside, I won't be covering Masterpiece the True Dracoslayer or Forge of the True Dracos. Technically they are True Draco cards, but they're tied up way more into Dracoslayer cards, so if we ever sit down and do an explained video on those, we'll cover them there. Now, the first 3 True Dracos are so similar, we can actually group them all together. Majesty Maiden, the True Draco caster, is a level 5 wind monster with 2300 attack and 1500 defense, and once per turn, while you control this tribute summoned monster and your opponent activates a card or effect, as a quick effect, you can add a True Draco or True King monster from your deck to your hand. Ignis Heat, the True Draco Warrior, is a level 5 monster with 2400 attack and 1000 defense, obligatory Monarch stat shout out here, and their effect has the same activation conditions as Majesty Maiden. But Ignis can take a True Draco or True King continuous spell from your deck and either activate it from your deck or add it to your hand. And Dynamite Knight, the True Draco Fighter, is a level 6 water monster with 2500 attack and 1200 defense, who still has the same activation conditions, but takes a True Draco or True King continuous trap card and either activates it right out of your deck or adds it to your hand. This makes up the backbone of the True Draco experience, getting you cards just for your opponent doing stuff. In fact, it's a pretty psychologically taxing move because basically every action they take has a negative consequence, i.e., giving you a free card. Even trying to hit them with an Imperm or Veiler to shut them off preemptively doesn't work because that's activating a card and or effect. And because you can tribute summon them using your continuous spell and traps, they're super easy to deploy. Or should I say, Dre continuous spells and traps. Drayath III, the True Draco Cavalry General, is a level 6 Earth monster with 2100 attack and 2800 defense, and while on the field, your opponent can't target face-up True Draco and True King monsters on the field with card effects, except this one. Also, they can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. And if this face-up tribute summoned monster leaves the field, you can special summon a True Draco or True King monster from your deck in defense position. But you'll generally want to summon True Kings over Dracos, since the latter won't have any kind of extra effect on the field. Though you might want to summon another copy of Dreath, because while the floating effect requires it to have been tribute summoned, the targeting and effect destruction protection effects just care that this card is on the field, making it even harder for your opponent to deal with your lineup. Dreath really is doing a good job of Dre covering for the team. Masterpiece, the True Draco Slaying King, is a level 8 light monster with 2950 attack and defense, and is unaffected by the effects of cards that have the same original card type as cards used for this card's tribute summon, counting monsters, spells, and traps. And once per turn, during either player's turn, if you control this tribute summoned monster, you can banish a continuous spell or trap card from your grave, then target another card on the field and destroy it. Wow, this card is obscene! Dryden was one thing, but now it's stapled onto an even bigger body that's a pseudo towers that can hit face down cards too! This was a menace to deal with back in the day, because hitting this thing with an effect it didn't have protection against was kind of a crapshoot, and getting a bigger monster was next to impossible. And really, you had to get 2 just in case the first one got sniped. Nowadays, there may be an argument for bringing this thing back as it's currently forbidden, but personally, I'd like to keep this locked up as long as possible. Besides, Lustre already made one masterpiece, now they're just showing off. Metaltron 12, the True Dray Combatant, is a level 9 light monster with 3000 attack and defense, and requires 3 tributes to normal summon, and can't be normal set. It's also unaffected by the same original card types as those used for its tribute summon, but since this card requires 3 tributes, if you use the right material, this actually can be a Towers. And if this tribute summoned monster in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can special summon a Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monster that is an Earth, Water, Fire, or Wind from your extra deck. So you get a humongous beatstick that's generally not going down except by battle, and when it does, you can pick your best non-light or dark monster from your extra deck, and as long as they're not sporting some kind of "this card can only be summoned by their particular summoning method" clause, you can slap them onto the field and go to town. However, it is pretty unwieldy. Even with a resource engine as good as True Draco's, tributing 3 cards is a lot, so it hasn't seen much play, even when Masterpiece was off the table. Still, not many cards can float you into Crystal Clearwing Synchro Dragon, so it's got that going for it. Alright, that's all of our monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps. Real quick though, there's also some key similarities between these cards as well. First, when sent from the field to the grave, all of our continuous cards trigger an effect. The continuous spell cards target a spell or trap card on the field and destroy it, while the continuous trap cards target a monster on the field and destroy it. And these combo pretty well with each other. Even when your opponent doesn't have a spell or trap card on the field you want to pop with your spell effect, you can hit one of your continuous trap cards, whether face up or face down, thus converting it into monster removal. And second, during the main phase, you can activate an effect that tribute summons a true Draco or true King monster, with the continuous spells doing so on your turn, and the continuous trap cards doing so on your opponent's turn. So you effectively get extra summons, and get to play a little bit on your opponent's turn. And because all of our continuous spells and traps trigger effects when sent from the field to the grave, you get some additional interruption on top of your summons. This deck is really frustrating to duel against, but I can't deny that it's got some really clever design. Disciples of the True Draco Phoenix is a continuous spell card, and it can target 3 True Dracos and or True King cards in your grave, shuffle them into your deck, then draws you a card. This effectively gives you an infinite grind game. As long as you have some number of Disciples in rotation, you can recycle cards back into your deck to use them for later, and you get to draw extenders, payoffs, or even the mythical out I've heard so much about. True Draco Heritage is a continuous spell card, and during your main phase, you can draw cards equal to the number of True Draco and True King card types sent from the field to the grave this turn. This is a massive reward for pulling off your game plan, drawing you up to 3 cards if a True King or Draco spell, trap, and monster were sent from the field to the grave that turn. But even just getting 1 or 2 is a great way to refill your hand, especially because Disciple's just gonna shuffle back those cards to get you more draws. Seriously, one of the most frustrating things about this deck is that Control doesn't usually have a lot of inherent card draw, but Dracos always seem to have some gas in the tank. But I guess when your progenitor is a fusion of 2 ancient dragon spirits whose physical manifestations are waging a global war causing massive destruction in their wake, you get a draw or 2. As a treat. True Draco Apocalypse is a continuous trap card, and it can target 1 other True Draco or True King card you control, destroy it, and if you do, the attack and defense of all face-up monsters your opponent controls become half their current attack and defense, even if this card leaves the field. An important clause because there's also no until the end of this turn on there, meaning that this is a non-targeting, board-wide debuff that does not go away. And it's not some piddly 200, 300 size loss. No monster with anything less than 4,000 can now go toe-to-toe against any of your True Dracos after this resolves, period. And of course, if you want the removal, you can just activate the Tribute Summon effect, use Apocalypse, and then blast a monster, easy as that. Your opponent can kiss their chances of victory goodbye with these Apocalypse. True King's Return is a continuous trap card that can target a True Draco or True King monster in your grave and special summon it in defense position. Also, for the rest of the turn, you can't special summon. That's actually the only effect in the entire theme that locks you out of something. Admittedly, losing special summons for the rest of the turn is a big one, but thankfully it only counts after you use it, so beforehand you're all clear. And since you can use this on your opponent's turn, and you primarily use extra normal summons, it only really keeps you from using your extra deck to access cards that you've splashed in. After all, the rank 5 and 6 pools have some nice cards in them. Now, the True Dracos you revive with this are only going to be big vanillas, but that's okay. As free monsters, their stats are pretty good, and they can still be tributed for summons, especially for Masterpiece and Metaltron. Heck, you could even summon Masterpiece and Metaltron with this because they don't have any special summon restrictions on them. But judging from the art, I don't think the True Kings are going to be returning to Monkey anytime soon. They look like they have other plans. Dragonic Diagram is a field spell, and all True Draco and True King monsters on the field gain 300 attack and defense. The first time each tribute summoned True Draco or True King monster would be destroyed by battle each turn, it is not, and once per turn you can destroy 1 other card you control or in your hand, and if you do, add a True Draco or True King card from your deck to your hand. Once again, we're greeted with the obligatory archetypal field spell that is not name-stamped, but unlike the rest of them, this one is actually good. Like, real good. Like, so good it has to be put on the limited list good. For True Kings, it destroys them even in your hand, letting you change them into a more useful card while triggering their effect. For True Dracos, you can pop your back row to similar effect. And they get battle protection once per turn while amping up their stats. Even Majesty Maiden goes up to 2600, which ain't too shabby. But the best part is that the True Kings aren't referring to the gigantic worms of destruction, but to the short kings that showed up to give Luster a bit more energy. As far as I'm concerned, they're the True Kings. Alright, so that's all the True King and True Draco cards, but what do we do with them? Well, for today's video, I'm going to be focusing exclusively on how to up your True Draco game, as the Kings have really lost their bite without calamities, and are really better at supporting other themes where their services can accentuate their strengths. True Dracos, on the other hand, are still a pretty savage control theme despite the hits, and the more we can slow down our opponent, the better our odds of success will be. So what can we play to help them out? Well, it's control, which means we have to talk about floodgates. Funnily enough, Goes in Match and There Can Be Only One don't really match up super well with us. Only Rivalry lines up with our monotype list, and unfortunately keeps out any non-worm teammates we might want to tag in. However, this is another theme that can use skill drain beautifully. While we don't have a clever way of dodging the negation like prank kids do, we can use our continuous spell's grave effects to turn it off when it's no longer needed. We could also do the same for summon limit, though to be fair, we don't really need a lot of summons to be effective. And of course, we can do similar things with Mystic Mine. But if you want something that's a little less intensive than skill drain, Lose One Turn is certainly available. We get all the benefits, and our opponent is stuck with all the consequences. Unless they're on Flunder, but that's a whole other bag of birdseed. Speaking of field spells, Dragonic Diagram is a huge part of our theme's success, but at 1, we need ways to get to it beyond just digging for it via draws. However, we only really have Terraforming and Metaverse to work with, which are both also at 1. Planet Pathfinder can use our regular normal summon to search it out, but if you're truly feeling unhinged, you could go the set rotation route. It's also limited, but this can get you Diagram while giving your opponent Mystic Mine. Then it's their fault for slowing the game down if they choose to use it, not yours. Is it possible for us to use other worm themes to help us? Well, kinda. I'd avoid Metalfoes, their focus on banishing isn't quite for us, but I could see some incidental synergies with Tenyi and Sword Soul. The former's spirits can be used as quick and easy tribute fodder if you don't have good access to your spells and traps, while the latter has some truly stupendous synchro monsters you can lean into. And since all their cards check for Sword Soul cards or worm monsters, True Dracos fit the bill. Even the tokens they generate can be used as tribute fodder if you're so inclined. If we want to go truly off the walls, we could add in some Monarch cards. The Monarch's Erupt is already a truly heinous floodgate, Stormforth is removal that lets us summon our True Dracos, and Domain Scythe locks your opponent, cutting off even more of their options. The downside is that a few of these cards require you to have no extra deck, which not only means you can't dip into it if you need some of the utility monsters, it also means you can't play Pot of Prosperity or Extravagance. However, Pot of Duality is still a fantastic pick, as you once again don't have to worry about the special summon lock. As for a silly tech pick, Crystal Beasts. Just splashing Crystal Beasts. They become continuous spells in the back row after all, giving you more tribute fodder. And with how much of a combo machine Sapphire Pegasus is, you can leverage their explosive power while using the control elements provided by True Dracos. It's kinda silly. And that's all I have to say about True Kings and True Dracos. Our little worms have a robust resource engine while being tough to overcome, while our big worms never really got their chance in the spotlight as a collective unit. But just you wait. We're gonna get some legacy support any day now that focuses them together as a coherent unit. They've terrified the competitive landscape in some form or another for years to come, and you never know when someone is gonna sleeve them up to take your next locals, or dare I say even regionals, by storm, claiming the title of True King of all calamities as their own. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are the True Draco Kings the GOAT of control, or do we need to do a little regicide? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to show your support, ring that bell so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out.
After all this time, I finally found you.
Ah, you must be that annoying Dracoslayer that's been meddling in my business. Come to fulfill your namesake, I take it.
Gladly. But first, I must know, why are you doing this?
You really want to know the truth?
I wouldn't settle for anything less.
Honestly, I was hoping you could tell me.
What?
One day I woke up and I couldn't remember a thing about myself, but I had this power, and I figured if I could just spread my will across the entire world, surely someone out there would find me and tell me what's going on?
And that's your only reason?
Well, that, and I thought it would be fun to see all the worthless scum out there squirm under my boot.
You monster.
Flattery will get you nowhere. Now, are you sure you don't have anything for me? Or will I have to squeeze it out of you?
Why do you have my face?
You know what? I just had the most pleasant urge to smash in that pretty little helmet of yours. Lechery, wrath, it's feeding time.
Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and welcome to Shuffling Through History, a series where a critical eye is applied to names, effects, card art, and other sources as we try to piece together the stories of the most iconic cards in the game's history. After going over Amorphages in the last video, having reviewed all the card art in detail in the process, it reignited the part of my brain that's been trying to puzzle out how everything is supposed to shake out in this scenario for the past half-decade. But why this story in particular? What makes Luster Pendulum and their adventures so compelling? Well, one part has to be the mystery. It's easy to infer the broader storyline. Luster goes on a journey to assemble the powers and skills necessary to defeat Vector, they have a climactic final battle, then Luster goes around to other archetypes, giving them power to fight off a new big threat before they come together for another climactic final battle. But to get the hows and the whys, you have to start tunneling into the specifics, and personally, I found it very rewarding. Also, 8 core sets translates to 2 years of storytelling, and over that time a number of powerful archetypes sprang forth. Majespecter, Metalfoes, Zoodiac, True Draco, even Dracoslayer by way of Draco Pals. And if you play an archetype for long enough to get competitively good with it, you're likely to find yourself invested in what happens to them in the lore. And that by no means excludes anything that doesn't make that competitive cut. Dinomist beat out Lightsworns in the Create a Card poll for crying out loud, so if that doesn't prove they're a fan favorite, I don't know what does. So, to get to the bottom of this, I'm going to attempt to construct a timeline, from the Clash of Rebellion's Igknights to the infamous True Dracos of Maximum Crisis, and I invite you to follow along as I lay out the evidence I have and explain my deductions. It's time to sort out the Dracoslayer saga. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. That way you can stay up to date on new releases, and my brain makes the happy juice when good number go up. Also, please consider ringing the bell, as it's a good way to stay on top of new releases, especially ones like this that aren't my usual fare, as well as letting you know when I go live for my Friday streams. We also have a Discord where you can hang out with the rest of the community as we try to figure out why Konami printed a Sylvan monster that isn't a Sylvan, and you can also follow me on Twitter if you want to stay up to date on channel updates and my bad takes. Thank you for your patience, and now, back to the video. Let's start with Igknights. At this point, there's no real expectation of any kind of storyline going on right now. In fact, the only connections between Luster Pendulum and the Igknights is aesthetics. The field spell, Ignition Phoenix, keep that name in mind for later, has 4 of the Blazing Brawlers granting their power to Luster Pendulum, who transforms into Ignister Prominence. And if you compare that Synchro's art with the rest of the Igknights, you can catch some similarities, especially the gears that spit fire. Disappointingly, despite an almost exclusively normal monster archetype, we get no information from them about the world at large. It's much more concerned with portraying the Igknights as a bunch of buffoons. Margrave, for instance, reads thusly. A high-ranking Igknight warrior. When he does enter the fray, his sweeping attacks are feared, not just by the enemy, but also his own troops. Gallant says, a leader of the most dashing Igknight commando unit. His greatest challenge is keeping the hot tempers of his men under control. And the card art doesn't do them any favors either. Igknight's Unite and Bad Aim show 2 sides of Cavalier attacking their own team. So suffice it to say, the firefighters won't be helping us out much in the lore department, but keep an eye on Ignister, we'll get back to them later. Next we have Dimension of Chaos, and now we have some proper lore to work with. Vector Pendulum, the Drake Overlord, has clear parallels to Luster Pendulum via their name, attack points, and typing. Their flavor text reads thusly. This overlord overran an entire world with his army of Draco fiends, using dragon alchemy to convert all life into his terrible minions. The source of this power is unidentified, and probably extra-dimensional. We don't currently have any context for what this means, but it'll definitely be helpful to refer back to later, especially the part about it probably being extra-dimensional. Their pendulum ability to blank out all of your opponent's pendulum spells, however, does allude to them being the antithesis of all the story archetypes revealed thus far and into the future, and since they're dark and Luster is light, it's safe to say they're in opposition. Sadly, Majespecter, the associated lore archetype for this set, doesn't give you much information either. They help provide Luster with the power to become Magister Paladin, and a trap card comes much later, Magister Gust, showing Kieran blasting away Amorphage Sloth, which is the only instance of any of the lore archetypes in this cycle coming into conflict with the main antagonist of the story. Dinomist from Breakers of Shadow don't do much either. We see them power up Luster Pendulum with a cool mech suit, but the biggest reveal is Master Pendulum, which is the form Luster will take for the remainder of the story. Their flavor text reads, Luster Pendulum, the Dracoslayer, continues his journey to uncover the secrets of dragon alchemy, believing it is the key to dispelling his curse and restoring his memory. His power continues to grow, perhaps the same power used by the Draco Fiends? So right here we see two familiar terms, Dragon Alchemy and Draco Fiends. We still have no idea what either of them are or what they're doing, but we know for certain that Luster is hunting down the same answers as we are because they have amnesia. There's also the implication that they're using the same power as their enemy, but once again, we have no context on how Draco Fiends wage war, so we can't draw any meaningful conclusions from it. I do want to touch on dynamic power load for a bit, because it focuses on a part of Luster's design that's going to be very important very soon. On all of their armor, you can see a little dragon insignia, and it's in a different position and color every time. But power load shows us a very close-up image of one of these transformations, and while we can see the Dinomist armor being attached, the dragon insignia is separated, and changing from silver to blue. So instead of this being a part of every new armor, it's a persistent attachment that detaches, changes, and then moves on to the next one. So Shining Victories comes out and we get a ton of info. They probably could have done a better job of spreading that out over the course of the set, but that's neither here nor there. Let's start with the new form of the Drake Overlord, Lecter Pendulum. This monster gives absolutely zero hoots about pendulums. As a spell, they negate all pendulum monster effects your opponent controls, and if it battles a pendulum monster, it blows itself and that pendulum monster up. They also have the same kind of dragon pendant that Luster does, and that's not the only thing they have in common. Looking at Amorphous Persona, we can see the two have the same face, hair, and wings, though of different colors. Quite the curious development. We'll circle back around to them in a bit and focus on Amorphages, because I believe they'll help to clear things up. I think it's pretty fair to say that these are the Draco Fiends spoken of in Vector and Master's flavor text. Like, if I saw a dragon look like that, I'd feel comfortable calling it demonic. They also all have that artifact attached to them, which I'll be referring to as a virus core from now on to make things easy, turning them into dragons with eyeballs all over their body. Because of this, I also feel like it's safe to say that this is the Dragon Alchemy, turning one creature into another, namely a creepy dragon. Oddly enough, Vector Pendulum has the same eyeball affliction as the Amorphages, but the virus cores atop their staff not embedded in them, which leads me to believe that Vector is using the virus cores to rewrite the genetic makeup of other creatures to match their own because they are technically a dragon, then commanding them using the primary core. So, knowing all that, let's start recontextualizing what we already know. Master Pendulum is trying to undo a curse on themselves that's sealing away their memory, and they believe Dragon Alchemy is the key to fixing it. They also believe that they're utilizing the same power as the Draco Fiends, but we can see that's not true. After all, Master Pendulum hasn't exploded out of any of their friends yet. It seems like they're all giving them their energy willingly, but if we're still to believe that this is all still Dragon Alchemy, then we're faced with another parallel between Master and Lecter's abilities. Lecter uses Dragon Alchemy and the virus cores to change the world around them to suit their needs, while Master uses Dragon Alchemy to adapt their body in response to what the world around them provides. One uses power to change others, while another changes with the power of others. With all that in mind, let's go back to the timeline. Draco Face-Off shows Master and Lecter squaring off. We don't see any of the battle, but Amorphous Persona shows that at least Lechery and Wrath were present. Those two have been defeated, and Master is looking pretty bad, their helmet having been shattered in the fight. Lecter doesn't look nearly as injured, but I think it's safe to assume that they fought each other to a standstill because their staff starts going out of control. The scepter begins drawing energy from at least 5 Amorphages in the area, and the toll on them can be seen in Amorphage Lysis, their unstable forms beginning to liquefy as their life forces are drawn out of them. Now, interestingly, this is not the first time we've seen this kind of trope in a Yu-Gi-Oh storyline. In fact, it's oddly similar to the post-Duelist Alliance Dual Terminal story, where the power of a particular theme is split across multiple colors, then recombined to form a fully powered entity, namely Cleese, Infernoids, Zephyra, and to an extent Gemini all fall into this category. Also, the corrupt living beings and turn them into members of your army thing has been done twice in that same storyline, with Evil Swarms and Shaddolls. And What was it again about how the origins of Lecter's power was unidentified and probably extra-dimensional? Lecter's virus core absorbs the power of the others, and like any desperate villain looking for a last-minute power boost, attaches the core to themselves and begins merging with what remains of Wrath, becoming Amorphactor Pain, the Imagination Drake Overlord. Now, the wiki says that the other half is Goliath, but in this instance I have to divert from its infinite wisdom. I'd like to point out that in Amorphous Persona we can see Wrath but not Goliath, Amorphactor Pain is part Silver Dragon, not Purple, and the size increase can be attributed to the virus core having absorbed an immense amount of energy and them growing larger as a side effect of that. Their name is also a big point of interest. What in the heck is an Imagination Drake Overlord? Well, this is one of those times where a word being used sparingly might give us a hint. See, the only other card with Imagination in its name is Void Imagination, the continuous spell used by Infernoids to summon out their approximation of the source of destruction, Tierra. And if that wasn't enough of a connection, their Japanese name translates to Amorphactor Psycho, the Void Drake Overlord. I believe that this is enough of a connection to confirm that the same power that brought Shadal's, Klee's, and Infernoids head-to-head with the Zephyr tribes has found its way into this story, and Lecter Pendulum is on the brink of obtaining a power strong enough to seal away the source of destruction. This leads us to Forge of the True Dracos, the final event of the Dracoslayer arc. Master Pendulum is on the ropes, Amorphactor has a substantial attack advantage, and all Master can do is ward off attacks from the melting monstrosity. But thankfully, all they have to do is stall for time, because the paradigm is about to shift once again. Remember how I said the little insignias on Luster's armor is actually its own little creature? Well, now's the time for it to come into play. In Amorphous Persona, we can see the insignias of both Master and Vector begin to act on their own in response to the virus core going berserk. And in Forge, we can see the two of them forming an Ouroboros with each other, away from the battle between the ones that had brought them there. And this results in the creation, or perhaps recreation, of Master Pendulum the True Dracoslayer, the twin dragon insignias coming together onto their armor. They possess a combination of both their hairs, two sets of wings, and while the armor is very much aligned to Master Pendulum, there are a number of divots in the armor with green gems in them that look very similar to the eyes around Lecter Pendulum. Now, this is the last we'll see of anything until Metalfoes show up in the next cycle, so there's a lot that needs explaining. First, what happened to Master and Lecter? Well, there's an argument to be made that Masterpiece is the combination of Master Pendulum and Amorphactor Pain, and I think it's half right. Because Master Pendulum's dragon insignia changed in response to the energies provided by Igknights, Majespecters, and Dinomists, I believe that means it's a manifestation of their spirit, which is why Master and Lecter's insignia were drawn to each other the first chance they got, because they're from the same original spirit. This in turn would absorb the spirits of both Master and Lecter, but leave the bodies. Because of the name, I think it's safe to say that, while they're a mix of the two, Master Pendulum the Dracoslayer contributes most to the personality of Masterpiece the True Dracoslayer. Okay, so if their spirits are gone, what about the bodies? I've got a sneaking suspicion that the leftover body of Amorphactor Pain becomes Goliath. They're the odd one out in a lot of ways. If the melting form stabilizes after battle and their scales match the color of the virus core in them, which we know happens to Amorphages, then the Wrath body would end up looking like Goliath. They even have similar snout structures. As for Master Pendulum, well, the card isn't called Forge of the True Draco singular, it's Forge of the True Dracos plural. Thus, Master Pendulum's new form does have a role to play in the future, but we'll discuss that when we bring up True Dracos later in the video. So how did this all get started in the first place? I've mapped out why I think the power wielded by Lecter Pendulum is the 10 pieces of the seal used to suppress Tierra by Sophia, but how did it get to this reality? Well, the battle between Tierra and Zephyrath as depicted in Master Guide 5 doesn't explain how the battle ends. Quote, "The scale of their battle shook the entire planet and lasted for 1,000 days and 1,000 nights. At the dawn of the 1,000th day, the forms of Tierra and Zephyrath were nowhere to be seen." Now, Vector Pendulum was using a power that was probably extra-dimensional. I wouldn't be surprised that the battle between Tierra and Zephyrath was so cataclysmic that they opened a tear in the fabric of reality, and those powers have been going from place to place across the multiverse until it arrived in this dimension. Once it did, well,
We all know how much Masterpiece loves going around handing out boons. They likely happened upon someone or something wielding the power of the 10-part seal, maybe even stumbling upon the end of the battle between the two titans, but they were dealt a fatal blow as the battle concluded. However, as part of the effect of Masterpiece, they were split into two instead of being outright destroyed, one dragon of light and one of dark, each having been implanted with one piece of the seal each. Luster Pendulum, wielding the white core, began looking for answers to cure their amnesia. Note that there's nothing physical showing that Luster Pendulum has the white core, but it's the only one left unaccounted for by the time of Amorphous Persona, and that's when the virus cores start going out of control. Vector Pendulum, wielding the purple core, was similarly struck with amnesia, but because of their evil nature, was more focused on procuring the remaining cores and taking over the world. That wraps up all the information and educated guesses about the Dracoslayer arc. Now it's time for the True Draco arc, and there's already a bit of an issue. Like I said, the story is pretty simple. Masterpiece gives the different archetypes of this year the power to fight back against the True Kings, but there's no Igknights. Or Majespecter, or Dinomist for that matter, they're all gone. But there are new archetypes that share similar traits. Metalfoes are rather similar to Igknights insofar as they're both fire attribute normal pendulum themes that care about destroying their own cards and looking metallic. Crystrons and Dinomists are both water machines, and well, the Zoodiac one isn't very strong, but they are a bunch of animal-themed humanoids, and Majespecters are a bunch of little animals. It's tenuous, so I'm not entirely convinced of it myself, but I wanted to put it out there just in case. This leads me to believe that we're in the far-flung future, because I think the similarities between the first two pairs I mentioned would be too much of a coincidence if this was an alternate dimension. We do get to see more of the tribes battling the True Kings this time around, cementing that they are more of a threat to the world at large. But despite that, there aren't very many lore drops. Across several sets, a True King will show up, the theme of that set would fight it, and repeat 2 more times. It's not until the final set that things start coming together. Wow, what a shocker. It looks like the destruction that the True Kings have caused has even broken the fabric of space and time, and out comes the True King of all calamities. In response, the 4th True King, Mariamne, provides some backup for the heroes, which is pretty odd, but what's also weird is how familiar they look. Ignis Heat, Majesty Maiden, and Dynamite Knight all bear striking resemblances to the forms Luster took during their journey to fight Vector Pendulum. These 3 are specifically included in the art for True Draco Heritage, with Masterpiece hovering over them, solidifying their connection. Remember how Luster's insignia would change color as they gained new forms from the tribes they visited, but for some reason they never used them later in the story, especially against the final boss? I'm attributing this to the energies splitting off and forming their own insignias, waiting for the right time to grow into their own beings. This is why the initial 3 are in True Draco Heritage, but Draeth III is in Disciples of the True Draco Phoenix, because Luster was never able to encounter an Earth-themed tribe. In fact, if you check Draeth's shield, you'll see one of those dragon insignias, likely the one that never grew up to be their own True Draco. But how did they go from being tiny pieces of dragon jewelry to being full-grown worm people? Well, as it turns out, we've already seen it. Forge of the True Dracos. That's right, the event that recreated Masterpiece also jump-started the growth of the other True Dracos. We also see this kind of growth in other creatures associated with Luster Pendulum. For instance, Mariamne. Once Master Pendulum's spirit left their body to form Masterpiece, the remaining shell grew into the 4th True King. I'm basing this largely off of their similar face design. While it doesn't look like Luster Pendulum, the helmet adopted by Master Pendulum is strikingly similar, and I don't think it's based off of Mariamne because the hair is the exact same, billowing in long, flowing blonde streams. But just like how the husk of Master Pendulum was enhanced, so too was Lector Pendulum's. See, the thing about the original OCG version of these cards is that they don't make a distinction between True Kings and True Dracos. That's mostly a TCG localization decision, which is why any effect involving one involves the other. It'd be more apt to divide them into True Dragons and True Dragon Kings. Still all part of the True Dragon umbrella, with King being used to designate the enemies, but this does imply that there's no fundamental division between the two. They're all descendants of the True Dracoslayer in one form or another, and that includes Amorphage Goliath. When affected by the power of the Forge, they begin to evolve into the True King of all calamities. They have the creepy body eyes, similar horns and scales, and that trademark streaming hair. Now in True King's Return, we can see Calamity coming through a break in space itself, so I think it's safe to say that before they become an issue, maybe even before they fully transform, Masterpiece sealed them into another dimension, the means of which I can't really confirm, but would likely draw on knowledge from their Electro Pendulum side, considering their use of the extra-dimensional power of the virus cores. Now might be a good time to go over some physical characteristics that I find interesting. Mariamne has, from my reckoning, 9 feathery wings, 2 on each side of their head, 3 more pairs along the body, and 1 for the tail. But each of the rest of the True Kings only have 1 pair of feathery wings, another pair of jet black wings that has a little divot at the base, similar to the kinds that the weird body eyes have, but with a kind of jewel that's similar to Masterpiece's armor, and a set of wings that are unique to them. When it comes to Mariamne, I think this is because of their pure spirit. When Luster Pendulum was separated from them, all that was left was the nature of being the light half of the previous Masterpiece, and so they continued to act on that instinct, shepherding and growing the true Dracos. Calamity was the exact opposite, but instead of having all dark wings, their body is still under the effects of the virus core mutation, so much like how Masterpiece has 2 pairs of wings, so too does Calamity and all of its children. Notably, the feathery and the dark wings are not attached physically to any of them, implying that they're given, not born with them. We see this in true Draco heritage, as this is the first time we see Master Pendulum with the same kind of feathery wings as Mariamne, becoming Masterpiece the true Draco slaying king. From the framing, it looks like they're being given to them by Mariamne, but this also takes place after Draconic Diagram, so it may in fact be wings that they should have had all along, but were just unlocked. Since they don't grant these wings to the smaller true Dracos, this may be the case. Unfortunately, there isn't much left to tell in this story. We don't see the true Dracos actually fight anyone on screen, but I believe they're focusing on distracting the lesser True Kings. In True Draco Apocalypse, we can see the new Masterpiece and Metaltron 12, basically Crystron, Quarry, and Gandrix decked out with gear from the Metalfoes and Zoodiac, flying towards Calamity, mouth ablaze with flame. But that's all we got. Maximum Crisis was the end of the Pendulum era, Code of the Duelist came right after with World Legacy, and we haven't heard a thing since. Do the true Dracos manage to defeat the Phantom of Lecter Pendulum once and for all, or is the world plunged into another age of darkness, where perhaps a group of scientists create the World Legacy machines to combat it? But that's a topic for another video. For now, these are the conclusions I've reached from studying all the available information on the Dracoslayer saga. Admittedly, there are some gaps I had to fill with speculation, especially with how the power of the Tiara Seal made its way to this realm, but perhaps new revelations in Blazing Vortex and the inclusion of more Metalfoes support will shine a light on what's been going on in that world since then. But until then, I'd like to hear what you all have to say about my findings. Do you think I'm onto something with this timeline? Or did I take too many liberties? Or do you have any counter evidence you'd like to bring up to disprove any of my points? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to help me out even more, please check out the description for places you can get more Nova. I have a Twitter, Discord, TCG Player affiliate link, all that good stuff. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and well, I've been away for a while, huh? And not from the channel, we've been plugging along quite well these past few months, but I haven't really checked in much since my trip to Zombie World and my Vendread Awakening, and I figured it was about time I fixed that. Oh, and for anyone who subscribed to the channel since then, first off, thank you so much, and second, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, this is still going to be a Draco lore video, don't worry about that, but it's going to be nestled in between some Nova lore. If you want to catch up, the button on the top right will take you to a playlist that has all the videos you'll need to watch, and if you want to jump ahead to the Draco stuff, I've got chapters down below that you can use. Okay, housekeeping stuff is out of the way. What have I been up to? Well, not much. A quick refresher, Eldritch and his goons kidnapped Ogdo Abyss, which was the entity keeping the underworld rivers from flooding over and causing massive damage to the hereafter. Aaron, the Ogdoadic king, tasked me with sorting out Zombie World while they tried to get Ogdo Abyss back, and that ended up backfiring. Long story short, I got infected by the Vendread virus, or the V virus if we want to keep the Resident Evil theming, but I got better, and ended up getting a sick power form out of it. I do have to eat 6 levels worth of monsters to activate it, but thankfully I've got a few mechanical friends that are pendulum monsters, so they come right back. Ever since then, well, We haven't had any clues. Eldritch, Vector, and Yugioh have been in hiding ever since they took Ogdo Abyss and are as elusive as ever. And none of our sensors here on the orbital platform or the Gizmex have been able to find Golden Hide nor hair of them. And what's worse is that I haven't gotten any form of contact from the Hereafter since I got back. I'd love to go check on Aaron, but only those with the power of undeath can travel to and from those realms. And those who are being helped by said beings.
Yeah, and aren't you an undead?
Technically I'm classified as a member of the living dead.
What's the difference?
Semantics, mostly.
Ugh, I hate this mess. Why do all the dead people follow Beetlejuice logic?
So aside from that, we've just been doing what we always do. But, like I said, despite our efforts, we haven't been able to track Eldritch down, which means we have to lure that golden goober out, and Konami just gave us the perfect bait. Darkwing Blast has been a set that's full of lore. We've had an update to the Albaz storyline, as well as enough elements for me to consider Vsauce, Michael here, as its own lore worth keeping up with. But the last thing I expected was another update to the Dracoslayer storyline. That's right, the last time we had a check-in from this world was in Blazing Vortex, where we saw the apparent defeat of the true king of all calamities, the most recent form of Vector Pendulum. We still haven't gotten the versions of Zoodiacs or Crystrons that got the update treatment like Metalfoes, but hopefully this shows that we'll be getting them sooner rather than later. But even though it doesn't touch on that, we still have a lot to chew through today. But before we get into it, you might want to check out my first video on the subject so you know where we're at. Once again, link in the top right. And while you're poking around, I wanted to ask if you would be so kind as to hit that like button, subscribe button, and bell icons, especially if you like what we're doing here, and check the links down below. I've got a Discord if you want to hang out with the rest of our lore-loving community, catch me on Twitch if you want to see me play a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you want episodes like this early, my Patreon gets you access to that while being one of the best ways you can support independent creators like me so I can keep explaining archetypes and lore. Okay, that covers that. Now it's time to get into the good stuff. Let's get the major bulletin points out of the way first. Luster Pendulum traveled the world in search of answers to discover their past, meeting several tribes along the way: the Igknights, the Majespecters, and the Dinomists, fighting the good fight against the Draco fiends along the way. All the while, Luster absorbed the power of the tribes and evolved into Master Pendulum, before squaring off against Vector Pendulum, later Lector Pendulum. The two battled fiercely to the point where they fused into one being, Masterpiece the True Dracoslayer, thus ending Part 1. Part 2 follows Masterpiece as they travel to 3 new tribes, the Metalfoes, the Crystrons, and the Zoodiacs, but instead of gaining their power, they confer theirs onto those tribes, granting them the power to stand against the true kings, enormous life forms that have been causing catastrophes across the planet. This all came to a head when the True Dracos, led by Mariamne, clashed with the True King of all calamities, leader of the True Kings. Masterpiece was then given the power of the True Draco faction, making them the True Draco Slaying King, and by joining forces with Metaltron 12, did battle with Vector Pendulum's latest form. And, thanks to Parametalfoes fusion, we can see that they succeeded in vanquishing the beast. That leads us to today, where we obtained 3 new Dracoslayer Pendulum monsters, as well as our own dedicated field spell. And after all the time Luster spent helping everyone else out, I think it's deserved. But that begs the question. If the big bad evil guy is defeated, where does this fall on the official timeline? Doesn't make much sense for the designers to portray events in a part of the story where nothing is happening. And that's because this isn't happening at the end of the current Dracoslayer arc, it's happening near the end of another, Part 1. And to explain, let's go back to some conclusions we reached last time. The field spells are very important in this storyline. Each one shows how the forms of Draco interact with each tribe, and they hide some very interesting clues. Looking back at Luster Pendulum's art, you'll see that little dragon amulet perched on their breastplate, and you'd be mistaken for thinking that this is just another part of the armor. But in the art of Ignition Phoenix and Dynamic Power Load, we can see that little dragon come to life, shifting and moving, taking on the color of the attribute associated with the tribe involved, and is even seen on the Extra Deck Dracoslayer's armor in its new form. This detail is so important that it basically forms the linchpin that connects parts 1 and 2, and is the basis for claiming that Lector and Master Pendulum fuse to form Masterpiece, because not only does Vector have their own tiny dragon spirit, we can see them twisting together in the art for Forge of the True Dracos. This also led to my theory that these tiny dragons ended up growing into the true Dracos during the times between Part 1 and 2. Despite there being no Igknights, Majespecters, or Dinomists in the setting for Part 2, each one took characteristics of the extra deck Dracoslayer monster they're associated with. Ignis Heat looks like Ignister Prominence, Majesty Maiden has similarities to Magister Paladin, and Dynamite Knight looks like Dinoster Power. Drieth seems to further support this claim, as the Earth Dracoslayer never came to be, and one of those tiny dragons can be seen with Drieth in the color we would expect the Earth one to be. To me, this sets up a pretty coherent timeline. After gaining the power of certain tribes, Luster would eventually shed that power, because we certainly don't see it maintain its larger forms across adventures, and that shed mini-dragon eventually grows up to be a true Draco, using that shed form as a shell to grow into. But if that form is their adult version, then the Dracoslayers we see now are some kind of in-between stage. So when we see them in Dragonic Pendulum, they're achieving the form we know them as now, the true Dracos. But what if it's the other way around? What if they're gaining the power of Pendulum? I mean, the card is called Dragonic Pendulum, right? Well, that does seem to track, but we actually have a card that helps to arrange the order of events to figure out what's going on, and that is Heritage of the Light. That's right, your eyes might have glazed over this unassuming common from Burst of Destiny, considering all the value in the rest of the set, but this singular image holds the key to solidifying a lot more of the timeline. Behind the particle effects, we can see our favorite Dracoslayer with 3 colored orbs, the same orbs seen in Dragonic Pendulum. Of note, we can see that these orbs are moving away from Dracoslayer because of the light arc coming off the red orb. This might also signify the moment Luster Pendulum becomes Master Pendulum. We know it's not the first masterpiece because there's only one pair of wings, and it looks like this version has Master Pendulum's sword, being wide with a curved blade instead of Luster's less ornate longsword, but they lack Master Pendulum's red horns. So, once Luster has accumulated enough power, they evolve to become Master Pendulum, and no longer needing the power granted by the 3 tribes, returns that power, perhaps even having been altered or empowered by their exposure to Dracoslayer, and help to catalyze the final evolution of these new Dracoslayers into their true Draco forms. I also enjoy the parallel we have here. Heritage of the Light, True Draco, Heritage, fun stuff. But we've been beating around the bush for a bit about a key detail that might sour things up a bit. See, if the true Dracos are all the evolved versions of these Dracoslayers, then how come only one of them seems to have any kind of humanoid feature, while all 3 of the true Dracos look like people? Well, for that, we're gonna have to take a look at the background of these cards. It's difficult to spot, but eagle-eyed viewers will notice that this is the same symbol that shows up in the Dracoslayers and Dracoverlord card art, as well as the Amorphages. It's a symbol that denotes the presence of dragon alchemy, the corruptive art that Vector Pendulum used to turn woodland creatures into heinous, body horror-inspired dragons. Now, we know that Luster and Vector are 2 sides of the same coin, so we've posited that it wasn't just Vector that was using dragon alchemy, but Luster as well. But our Warrior of Light was using it to enhance themselves, as opposed to Vector, who was using it to warp others. And while I still think that's the case, it seems to have gone one step further. Remember how earlier I pointed out that the Igknight and Dinomist field spells depict Luster's transformation into their extra deck forms? Well, those are the only 2. The Majespecter one, Majesty's Pegasus, shows Majespecter Unicorn Kirin receiving the same treatment as Luster received in the Art of Ignition Phoenix, with all the members of a tribe giving their power to a single being. And the incongruities keep going too, because Magister Paladin is the only Dracoslayer extra deck monster that isn't an enhanced version of Luster Pendulum, but is instead teaming up with Kirin, who is sporting a sweet new pair of wings, by the way. However, Luster still has a little dragon pendant that matches the color of the wind attribute. Kirin is also the only member of any of the tribes in this series to be shown fighting the Amorphages, as shown in Majespecter Gust. So what does all that mean? Well, here's what I think. Luster Pendulum wasn't able to help defend the Majespecters for some time, so Kirin had to step up, and was given the power of the tribe that Luster would usually receive. But the tiny elemental dragons still needed a host. With the Igknights and Dinomists, that was a little less weird, as both themes are basically machine constructs. The Igknights are warriors, sure, but we haven't seen a single organic thing from them. So if the little dragons needed a host to grow into, the shell left behind by Luster would be a good place to grow from. But Kirin... Well, that's definitely a living, breathing, organic creature, and that's why Majesty Pegasus looks so different from the other two. And it confirms that this is another form of dragon alchemy. True, Kirin isn't sprouting dragon limbs out of their back or something, but they are sprouting a whole human body out of where their head would be. It's still pretty gruesome if you think about it, but it's certainly not framed that way. And that might be because this was a willing transformation. I doubt Vector's victims wanted to be hit by the mutagen, but if the dragons left behind by Luster stayed with the tribes they visited as another member to help fight against the Amorphage threat, Kirin could have willingly accepted that spirit and transformed into Majesty Pegasus. But this leads to another question. Why in the world do they lose the power of Pendulum as time goes on? Well, I don't have an exact answer for this, but it seems to be in line with how the Dracoslayers grow. No form of the Dracoslayer or Drake Overlord maintain their pendulum power in part 2 of the lore, which either implies that it's just something they grow out of, or that the pendulum power only exists so long as the two Dracos remain separate, though that last one doesn't hold as much water since the Metalfoes are very much pendulums. In fact, the mechanics continue to support the idea that they grow out of it. In their Dracoslayer forms, they still count as members of their individual archetypes and maintain that archetype's typing. However, when we see them as true Dracos, they've all turned into worms and are no longer part of those archetypes. And that just about wraps up what we learned from this set's lore. We found out how the true Dracos came to be, and that Luster was utilizing some form of dragon alchemy to not only enhance itself, but also create other Dracoslayers. It's a pretty nifty bit of backstory that helps clear some things up, and adds to how cool and base Dracoslayers are. Which means, by contrast, the Drake Overlords are stinky smelly doofuses who couldn't duel their way out of a paper bag. I mean, if they had anything to expound upon, they would have made like Drake Overlord support, or Amorphage support.
Well, maybe if people didn't complain so much about floodgates, then the designers wouldn't be such cowards about making more cards that reflect the brilliance of Vector.
And gotcha! I knew you wouldn't be able to resist us talking about your superior half.
What's so superior about them? I'm the one with the army, I'm the one that negates the power of Pendulum, and I'm the one that's taking over the world. I don't see Luster doing anything like that.
What you are is about to get your butt kicked. You just walked into the hornet's nest, buddy, and I know a few desk bots who are looking for the salty run back after last time.
Ah. It appears I've made a slight error in judgment. No matter, I've said my piece. Yuki, get me out of here. Yuki? Yuki?
Can't let you do that, Vector. After all, I went through all the trouble of getting you here. I can't very well let you bow out early.
What have you done?
I thought you were the brains of the operation. I jammed the signal.
Jammed? This isn't a radio signal, it's supernatural power.
Exactly. Yuki helped you teleport out of Kozaki's lab, and I noticed that Aaron was shifting me back and forth between the hereafter, so it seems the undead have the ability to warp dimensions and teleport. And guess who just started tapping into their death drive?
Joy.
Oh, don't act so surprised. I've made a hobby of messing with Yuki at this point. I'd like to think I've gotten pretty good at it.
So how is this going to play out?
Simple. You're gonna tell us where Eldritch is hiding and what he plans to do.
Not happening.
Then I guess that means we're gonna have to make things a little bit more complicated.
Yes, a duel is in order. I've been itching to get my revenge.
Actually, I think I'll handle this one.
But I must reclaim my honor, the honor of all my despot siblings.
How do you think I feel? These assholes hurt my friends, and I haven't had a chance to show my stuff yet.
Very well, then allow me the honor of assisting you.
Wouldn't have it any other way, buddy. Resonant howls of the beyond resound! No Vendread origin!
You're not as smart as you think. Once I defeat you, that jamming field of yours will fade. Soul mutation! Deck fabrication, activate! Let's duel! Okay, I'll start.
Oh, come on!
But I'm your guest. Surely you have some manners.
Ugh, stupid hospitality.
I shall set the scales. Amorphage, gluttony, and lechery.
Nice scales, dingus.
Enjoy your laugh while you can. Dragon Shrine will make quick work of that.
I'll send Vector Pendulum from my deck to the grave, and because that's a normal dragon, I'll also send Amorphage Goliath, which pairs nicely with my Return of the Dragon Lords.
Oh, great.
Since Goliath is a level 8 monster, I'll summon it back from the grave, which will keep both of us from special summoning monsters from the extra deck, except Amorphages. And because I now control an Amorphage, Gluttony and Lechery's effects are active, keeping both of us from activating non-Amorphage spell and monster effects.
Now I can see why you want her to go first.
We've been keeping an eye on you, Nova. To beat me, you'll have to overcome my towering intellect, and we all know that's not happening.
Floodgate Loser says what?
What? I end my turn by activating Amorphage Infection. Try to squirm out of this, worm.
No problem. Draw! So no spells, monster effects, or extra deck summons, huh? Well, I'll just set 2 cards and pass.
Ha! Helpless. Just like I thought.
Helpless? You've got to do some upkeep, buddy. I don't think your field is going to be as solid as you think.
Then think again. I draw. During my standby phase, I must tribute a monster to maintain each of my scales. And since I have some spells I'd like to use, I'll only be saving Gluttony to keep monster effects locked down. Gluttony, prey upon Goliath to maintain yourself. And Lechery will go to the extra deck after being destroyed. Because I tributed a monster, Infection triggers, letting me add an Amorphage card from my deck to my hand, and I'll grab Amorphage Wrath.
Alright, you've got 1 scale, a continuous spell, and no trap cards. What's the play?
I don't play, I win. Since I have a card in the Pendulum Zone, I can activate Duelist Alliance, adding a Pendulum monster, spell, or trap card from my deck to my hand. And I choose Pendulum Paradox. Since Goliath and Lechery are both in scale 5, I can add them from the face-up extra deck to my hand. Now, with a few more cards in my disposal, I set Wrath to the Pendulum scales, then normal summon Lechery.
Aw, what a tiny monster.
Not for long. Because of Infection, my Amorphages gain 100 attack for each Amorphage card on the field, and I'm counting 2 scales, a continuous spell, and a monster, boosting them to 1750 attack. We'll go to the battle phase and crush your defense position monster.
You sure about that?
Yes!
Alright, it's your funeral. Yeesh, tough crowd. Anyway, I activate Vendread Reorigin.
Nice try, but Wrath is in the Pendulum scale, while I control Lechery, keeping us both from tributing monsters.
Except Amorphages. Looks like you didn't plan for every eventuality. I'll go ahead and tribute that Lechery, making a Dark Zombie Vendread token with 0 attack and defense that has the level of the tributed monster. So 2. And since your Infection has already triggered this turn, you don't get a search, even though I did just tribute it away.
Inconceivable!
Really? It's only a few lines of text. Is that too much for your towering intellect?
I will not be mocked like this! Just don't forget you're locked into Vendread summons while you have that token. I pass turn.
Hey, now we're talking. I draw. Now, without an Amorphage on board, your Floodgate effects actually don't apply. So now it's time to wrap things up. First, I'm going to activate Pre-Preparation of Rites, adding Revendread Origin and Revendread Slayer from my deck to my hand. Next, I'll use my normal summon to bring out Vendread Striges. And so we can clear away this lock, I'll perform a Link Summon. Using my Vendread token and Vendread Striges, I'll bring out a Vendread Savior.
So what will you be revealing for Striges?
Oh, that? No, I'm gonna pass on that for now. I'm actually going to use Savior's first effect to add it back to my hand.
I can't believe I'm losing to misplays like this.
Misplay? If I bring back Striges, that's 1 less token I'm going to be able to make.
What?
Anyway, I flip up Scapegoat, summoning 4 Black Sheep tokens, each being a level 1 Dark Zombie.
Oh no!
Oh yes! With all this advantage, you're in for some grave consequences. I'll take 3 of these tokens and make Vampire Fascinator. A recent addition to the Vampire family, this card can special summon a monster from my opponent's grave on Link Summon. And you just so wonderfully sent yourself to the grave with your Dragon Shrine. Yoink!
How do these battles always end up with you do-gooders stealing one of us?
Hey, in my defense, that last time wasn't scripted.
Pardon?
So, yeah, I have you on board, which will make for fine tribute fodder. I activate Revenge Red Origin, tributing Vector Pendulum, the Drake Overlord, and the Striges in my hand to make Revenge Red Slayer. I'll reveal a Vendread core in hand to revive Striges, and then I'll link away the last token and Scapegoat to make Vampire Sucker. And they're all going to attack for game. 1600 from a Vendread Savior, 2400 from Vampire Fascinator, 1600 from Sucker, and to finish things off, Revenge Red Slayer, attack for 2400 and end this.
You're in over your head.
I'm sorry, what?
I activate my skill.
Skills? We're bringing skills into this?
I wanted to keep this a surprise for later, but you leave me no choice. Once per duel, if my opponent would attack me with a monster whose attack is more than or equal to my life points, I can trigger true Drake Overlord domain. I special summon a Drake Overlord monster from my extra deck, and if I do, the attack is negated.
So you're gonna bring yourself back, huh? That doesn't seem too bad.
Oh, that's because it's much worse. I special summon the Pendulum Exceeds monster, Unleashed Staff of the Drake Overlord.
I'm sorry, what? That's not real!
True, but it seems Dream-themed cards are on the table as well.
I haven't made one of those since Amazonas Fusion.
Inquisitive minds may beg to differ. Regardless of your belly aching, my card has been summoned, and your attack halted.
Oh, that's so lame. Fine, I set 1 card and end my turn.
Excellent. Now then, I draw, and during the standby phase, I allow Wrath to be destroyed. But Gluttony, I'll gladly tribute Unleashed Staff of the Drake Overlord for its upkeep.
Well, at least I don't have to worry about whatever that was anymore.
Oh, on the contrary, this is where all the fun begins. Infection triggers as Chainlink 1, since one of my monsters was tributed, and as Chainlink 2, I'll activate Unleashed Staff's effect, which triggers when destroyed or tributed, placing it in my Pendulum Zone.
What the hell? It's even got a 0 scale. That's so busted.
Good. That's the idea. Now you see what Amorphages could be, and what I'll make them once I'm free of this dreadful narrative realm. I'll add Amorphage Pride from my deck to my hand. And now that I have scale 0 to 5, I'll carve the Arc of Despair. I Pendulum Summon level 4 Pride from hand and level 2 Lechery from my extra deck.
Well, I mean, sure, but 2 blockers aren't going to do much. What do you plan to do? Tribute summon the Goliath?
Oh no, I'm going to Link Summon.
What, did you make a custom Link monster too?
Not at all.
Then you've played yourself. Neither player can special summon from the extra deck except Amorphage monsters.
That's true. Normally.
Oh no.
However, as a pendulum spell, Unleashed Staff of the Drake Overlord makes it so all Amorphage effects that originally applied to both players now only apply to my opponent. Which means, with 2 pendulum monsters, I'll Link Summon Beyond the Pendulum. I'll pay 1200 life points, half of my remaining life points, to add Amorphage Greed from my deck to my hand.
Well, okay, this is fine. You've already pendulum summoned.
True, but you haven't considered the card I drew for turn.
Which is?
Extra Pendulum! By playing this spell, I'm allowed 1 extra Pendulum summon of monsters from my extra deck. I'll Pendulum summon back Wrath and Lechery to Beyond's Link points, triggering its effect to pop 2 cards. One will get rid of your Vampire Fascinator, and the other will be my Amorphage Gluttony.
I'm losing my mind. What in the world are you planning?
Well, I haven't used my normal summon yet, so I'll summon the Amorphage Greed I searched earlier. Then, I'll use Greed and Wrath to build the overlay network. Come forth, sealed staff of the Drake Overlord! There's 2 of them? What can I say? You were very generous. Now, I'll activate its effect. By detaching an Exceeds material, I can destroy an Amorphage card I control to special summon an Amorphage monster from my hand. And you want to know another fun quirk about my new cards?
Oh no.
Both Unleashed and Sealed Staff of the Drake Overlord are treated as Amorphage cards. So I'll destroy Sealed Staff of the Drake Overlord to special summon the Goliath in my hand. And like Unleashed Staff, Sealed Staff is set to my Pendulum Zone when destroyed or tributed.
A 0 and a 13 scale. That's just overkill.
The best kind of kill. Now, time to go to the battle phase. Lechery is currently gaining a 500 attack boost thanks to Infection, 100 for each Amorphage card I control, counting 2 scales, 2 monsters, and Infection itself, which is big enough to walk over your vampire Sucker for 250 damage.
Whoa, wait, why did Sucker get banished?
Another wonderful effect of my scales. Unleashed Staff makes it so only you are affected by my Amorphage effects, but Sealed Staff makes it so all Amorphage Pendulum monsters' Pendulum effects apply even when they're monsters. And since Goliath is a macrocosmos, well, let's just say your options are running out very quickly. Goliath, destroy Revendred Slayer!
I may still take 850 damage, but I'm banishing Revendred Origin from my grave to protect Slayer. And since Origin's effect is a replacement one that doesn't activate, Lechery does not stop me from using it.
A futile effort, but seeing you struggle is making this all worth it. To keep you from stealing the game by attacking Lechery, I'll link Beyond the Pendulum and Lechery into Zephyra Metaltron.
Metaltron? That's one of the true Dracos! Why are you running that?
I'm sure your deck runs Svendred Battlelord. It's the same thing. I end my turn.
Well, it was nice dueling you, but now it's over.
Oh, this is rich. What do you think you're going to do against this field?
Simple. My skill.
Your skill? You didn't even know we were playing with those until just now.
But you forget, Vector, I'm the author and protagonist. I decide the story, and thus, I call upon the ability all main characters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Have. I activate my skill, which triggers when I'm in a dire situation to get me just the right card I need to win. Destiny Draw! Wait, what?
Your skill isn't Destiny Draw, it's Solemn Wishes. But it's worse because you only get to use it once.
Shut up. I'm going to use the card I just drew, Vendred Nightmare. Then I'm immediately going to go to attacks. Revendred Slayer is going to attack into your Zephyra Metaltron, and when it attacks, I'm going to banish Scapegoat, giving Slayer a permanent 300 attack boost, putting it just over your Metaltron. And since an attacking Ritual Vendred defeated a monster by battle, it also gains a permanent 1000 attack boost, putting it at 3700, way more than your Goliath. And now you can't just pend for 3 every turn. I'm gonna pass turn, and if I'm not mistaken, that effect of Sealed Staff gives your monsters all their pendulum effects, including the ones that sacrifice themselves. I'll draw for turn, and during my standby phase, I tribute Goliath for their own upkeep, getting a search from Infection, and I'll get Sloth. That's pretty scary, but Slayer's more than a match for it with how big they are now.
You'd think, but most Amorphage players run Odd Eyes Revolution Dragon as a search card.
Oh, come on.
But today, I'm going to use it for something else.
I Pendulum Summon. To the Extra Monster Zone, I summon the level 4 Gluttony, and from the hand, I summon the level 6 Sloth, and the level 12 Odd Eyes Revolution Dragon! It gains attack equal to half your life points, and since yours are at 7,400, Revolution has 3,700. Exactly. And without your origin engraved to keep you safe, I go to battle phase. Revolution Dragon, crash with Revendred Slayer! I'll activate Revendred's effect and damage calculation to not while Gluttony is on the field. Your monster effects are offline, and that keeps you from using Slayer's floating effect. However, my effects are all clear, including my Return of the Dragon Lords. Oh, go to hell! I don't think I will. I banish Return of the Dragon Lords to keep Revolution Dragons safe, and then Sloth will run over Revendred with 2750 attack because of infection, dealing 1150 points of damage when it runs you over, leaving you with 6,250 life points, meaning Revolution Dragon is still at 3,125 attack. Yeah, well, I still have more life points than you do, chump. One wrong move, and you're dead meat. True. As much as I want to keep up these searching and monster effect floodgates, one of your nasty ritual spells is all you need to win. So I'll simply link Sloth and Gluttony into Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres, then pass my turn. Oh, great. I hate that stupid card. Draw! I could turn Striges to attack position and threaten to run over Seals, but if Vector doesn't go for it, I won't be doing enough damage for game. Let's see if we can bait that effect. I activate Ravenous Vendred! That's new. Haven't had a chance to make an update for it. I get to special summon a Vendred from my deck face down, then I can perform a ritual summon of a Vendred monster in my hand or in my grave using monsters I control, including the summoned monster. And I'll use it to ritual summon Slayer back from the grave. And what, pray tell, is the monster you're trying to special summon with Ravenous? Well, it's gonna be another new friend, Scar Vendred. And if it's sent to the grave, I can add any Vendred spell or trap card from my deck to my hand. And I choose Revendred Evolution. Now I'll activate Revendred Evolution to ritual summon Vendred Battlelord, sending another copy from my deck to the grave. Ah, I see. You want to shut off my ability to activate spheres. Well, that's not going to happen. On summon, I'll be using Heavenly Spheres to bounce that back to your hand. I'll also use Sphere's effect on Tribute to summon Lecter Pendulum to the field in defense position. And since Infection saw a monster be tributed, I get to add an Amorphage from my deck to my hand, and Envy will do nicely. Alright, well, that bites, but now it's all over. I'm gonna normal summon Vendred Core. You must be kidding. Trust me, I'm only just beginning to kid. I'll turn Striges to attack position, and now it's time for the final battle phase. Well, it's been a long game, but it seems like I've finally driven you off the deep end. Don't count your freaky science experiments until they've awoken from the birthing vats. Vendred Core, attack Odd Eyes Revolution Dragon. Well, say goodbye to all those life points. That's right, I'll go down to 3,125. Now, Vendred Striges, do the same thing and attack into Odd Eyes Revolution Dragon. No, not like this! I'll be taking 1,062 points of damage, putting my life points at 2,063, which means your revolution is now at 1,031. Now, Revendred Slayer, clean up the last of Vector's life points and close out this duel! Revendred Reaver! Ah!
Ooh, that was rough. Vital signs are showing as stable, but brainwaves are below consciousness threshold. I believe it is safe to say that Vector will be knocked out for some time.
Good. Everyone, let's take this bastard to the brig. He's got a lot to answer for.
Okay, well, Looks like we aren't going to get any info out of Vector today, but I hope you enjoyed the new information that you got about Dracoslayers. Let me know your thoughts and theories in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to show your support, ring that bell so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out.